And we are live.
So, perfect. Now, today will be the 5th version of the JCU Posthuman Studies workshop. I'm so happy to see all of you here. Normally, we've been hosting it in the Aula Magna of John Cabot University. It's always been great. We've gathered people were coming from different parts of Europe. There were people coming from Italy. We always included sort of local scholars as well as students from John Cabot University to discuss the great variety of topics related to posthuman studies, always with a specific focus. Today, the topic we'll be focusing on will be truth. One of the church fathers, Lactantius, stressed around 300 after Common Era that Christians should not adore images because they are made of earth. Another church father, half a century later, Ambrosius, stressed that imaginations have a pernicious influence because one gets deceived by the imagination, so that the soul turns to matter and is glued to the body. The perfect immaterial soul despises everything that is corporeal, as the imagination opposed to the truth is a matter of our weakness. The imagination, matter, and the corporeal are central for the various philosophies of the posthuman, be it transhumanism, be it critical posthumanism. This is what all of the great variety of philosophies of the posthuman share. So it's a move towards essential, it's a move towards material, to the body, to a naturalism. So according to that traditional, to the understanding of the Christian fathers, that would be a move away from the truth. So we need to talk about the truth. What notion of truth can we still uphold in the age of the posthuman paradigm shift? And this is what we're going to do. As it's always been the goal of the workshop to bring the various voices of the philosophies of the posthuman together, from critical posthumanism, from transhumanism, metahumanism, and to bring together a great variety of diverse voices from different departments, but also world-leading scholars together with local experts as well as with students from John Cabot University, so that we have a different range of disciplines, ages, expertise, but all contribute something extremely important to that debate. I'm particularly happy that today we have as keynote speakers Natasha Vitamore and Giacomo Maramao. The structure of the workshop is always that we have an encounter of world-leading intellectuals as well as most promising students from John Cabot University. Please, at home, you will be able to participate in the discussions by using the chat box right next to the YouTube channel. So even during the presentation, if one of your some question comes to mind, just put down the question and we will pick up the question and we will then ask the question to the presenter. So each presenter has approximately 50 minutes plus, which is a talk plus a discussion. And each presenter will be briefly introduced by the co-organizer, Chrissy Soteriadis. The questions will be asked by her and me and others presenters, and Brunella Antomarini, another co-organizer, after each talk. But obviously the other participants can also ask questions if they want to. Then after the event, after all the speakers, there will be a final discussion where basically questions can be asked to all the presenters and the presenters can discuss the issues with each other. So yeah, I'm passing on the word to Brunella now.
Thank you, Stefan. Yes, it's always a pleasure to have this open floor to new issues instead of going back to the causes and the past. In fact, paradigm shift means can we get rid of the truth in the way in which it has been presented all over the history of philosophy? Isn't it an obsolete definition that we receive actually from what, as Stefan hinted at, we receive this universalist definition of the truth from theology, from the medieval theology, and from humanism, from the Renaissance, which was the kind of redefinition of theology in philosophical terms. the truth is not avoidable, it's not evitable in any case. So the issue is how to be anti-universalist without being superficially relativist, because relativism is a great focus of the 20th century. Now, at the turn of the century, we realized that relativism had a political importance, maybe ethical importance, but on an epistemological level, it has left a legacy of more problems. The new problem is how to save a matter-of-fact definition of the truth, which doesn't use binary logic, doesn't use rationalism and rationality. The problem of matter-of-fact is actually what has triggered the new currents in philosophy, which I find suspicious, like the new ontology, new rationalism, speculative realism, who seem to reshuffle all these ideas, which is justified by the conundrum, by the problem of relativism. So this is a good point. This is a wide point. Before we start, I would like the ones of us from JCU to join me in sharing a thought of affection to our librarian, Elisabetta Morani, who passed away yesterday, and she was much loved by all of us, and she's now in our hearts. Okay, now I would leave the floor to Christy. Thank you all.
Thank you to everyone who's joined in from all over the world. We see all these highs coming in from YouTube. And also thank you to Professor Sorgman and to Professor Antomarini for helping me realize this workshop with them virtually and online. I just want to remind all our viewers that you can ask questions while our presenters are presenting on the live YouTube chat. And our lineup is particularly interesting. Although we can't be meeting up in person this semester, we have speakers from all over the globe. And that's the wonderful thing about being online with this workshop. And what's particularly interesting is that the speakers are presenting their topics from various academic fields, including political perspectives, philosophy, literature, and art. So it's an exciting workshop that's coming up. And I would like to introduce now our first keynote speaker, Natasha Vita Moore. Natasha is a world-leading transhumanist and currently executive director of Humanities Plus. She has numerous publications, and her research focuses on the questions humanity is facing today and that are impacting our future, from AI to human enhancement, life extension, and space exploration. And her presentation is entitled Truth, well, Not Without an Error Correction Playbook. So let me bring Natasha to the screen. And
Hello.
The floor is all yours.
Thank you. And thank you, Søren, for inviting me. I'd like to say that the explanations already provided are spot on. I couldn't agree more with both speakers. And looking at the most obvious statement, which is the truth will set you free. And that is so true. One of the issues that I'm finding is that we've forgotten some of these lovely quotes. The most free person in the world is a person who has nothing to hide. Or the greatest advantage of speaking the truth is that you don't have to remember what you said. Or the only people mad at you speaking the truth are those who are lying. And I think those beautiful words of wisdom, which interestingly enough are anonymous, are still hold water. And when we're looking at some of these new ideas like object-oriented ontology and speculative realism and new rationalism, these very simple messages get obfuscated. They become confused by theoretical supposition, reorganizing, reassessing, reframing. But on the other hand, they're also very important because the truth of the matter is we don't exist or coexist in the same matter that we once did. By that, I mean the biosphere has been the material physical world that we have coexisted in since the earliest hominids, going back to the Australopithecus, and every species on this planet has coexisted within this wonderful biosphere. Yet, we're communicating right now in another substrate. We're virtually communicating, and this means something very important to the understanding of truth, because I currently have a screen on my camera, on my video settings, that says improve my appearance. Now, I put it midway rather than faking it to go all the way, because some wrinkles are lovely, and that's the truth. And speaking about the truth in regards to aging, those wear and tear on our bodies and our minds, however painful and daunting they can be at times, reflect the truth of our own experience. And to erase that or cover it up lessens or weakens and waters down personal identity. So my view on the truth is that we cannot logically, rationally, in reality, present truth unless in the future we have something that I refer to as an error correction. And we do it already in our own psyche, where we will say something or believe something or assume something. And then we pause and go, wait a minute, was that really what I meant to say? Or did I hear that correctly? Or where was that information stemming from? Did I do my due diligence? Did I check my sources? And as a professor, what I've noticed with students, and I'm sure many of you who are faculty can agree with this, it's very important that we check our students' references. And whereas Wikipedia was a no-no in scholarship, today we're starting to accept Wikipedia because Wikipedia itself has started paying more attention to reliable information and the truth. So the editors of articles on Wikipedia are selected more effectively rather than randomly. And when we select the truth that we want to believe, we have to realize first if we're sharing that same truth. For example, the field of ethics. The truth in ethics ought to be based on policies and legislation, rules and laws, and ways of being in the world. However, one's own morality is a different truth. Your morals may be different than mine, but that doesn't mean you're right and I'm wrong, or I'm right and you're wrong. It's just a set of morals that we codify our lives and our belief systems. So the point here that I'm trying to make is that the more technologies that we use to determine truth, stemming from just the look on someone's face, personal behavior, the way we're sitting, the way we're talking, the way we're looking at each other, or a polygraph system. But in the future, there'll be stronger and smarter technologies that can be used to effectively determine if someone is speaking their truth, and then the circumstantial truth. So in the areas of truth, I think it's very important that we consider what it's going to be like when we have more simulated environments, artificial environments, and environments where we can have avatars and other type of identities represent us. Where does truth become there? So the question is, do we need to redefine truth? Or can we have many truths? Maybe there's a truth for one type of relationship or situation and another truth for a different situation or relationship. So these are some very important issues when we start breaking down artificial intelligence, virtual systems, coexisting on different types of substrates like we are right now with this virtual substrate. There is nothing like the truth. And no matter what type of ontological phrasing we want to put on it, or philosophical determinant, and how we reason our ethics of truth and the morality of one's personal truth, it all boils down to how do you feel within your skin. And the original ideas about the truth sets you free is so significant in looking at surveillance and susveillance, and the ways that everything we're doing is being recorded. So if I say one thing on a recording and do something else in my personal life, I could be brought to justice on that. I could be brought before my friends or a committee or my colleagues and said, Why would you say this and then do that? And we're noticing this more and more with the news, where we're seeing that the tattletaling in the news has become one person's truth. But that tattletaler, the person who is exposing someone else, rightfully or wrongfully, that's to be determined by each person, that tattletaling is more of a surveillance of us upon each other. And we've noticed this with the pandemic, people reporting each other for not wearing masks, or people going all Karen on other people and dictating what you ought to do or not to do. So the larger issue then becomes, what is the messaging? What are we being told? And how do we follow the rules and the etiquette of certain environments when the rules are established? So it boils down, in my view, that an error correction system is what is most needed. And with the meta brain that I designed some years ago, it still holds true that if we could have a better replay on what we're saying and a more accurate and reliable feedback system on what we're doing, it could help us evolve and become more enlightened people and follow our own directive in how we say something and how we follow up and do something. Oftentimes, the human brain is fuzzy. It's infallible. Some say, from my own experience, I see so many crossovers and confusions in neurology, neuroscience, cognitive science, and the different areas that study the brain. But if we think about memory as being core to personal identity, therefore core to philosophical systems, personal identity can become better, improved, more reliable, more self-sufficient if we're careful in assessing what we say and how we say it. And certainly the tools that are being developed for this, augmentations to the human brain, enhancements, and other devices will help us better form our recollection. And this type of error correction is what I'm referring to. A better way to assess how we're behaving in the world, because bottom line, it all boils down to our own health and well-being. So the truth will set you free. Thank you.
Perfect. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha.
The truth will set you free. I was very intrigued and curious about what you said about the morality and the ethics of the truth, because here it's really, that is one of the challenging issues. But can we really apply something like a notion of truth in the field of morality, where is such a great plurality of different opinion? But is there any kind of minimal standard which can be upheld, and what would be the basis for that from your perspective?
From my perspective, when we get into the realm of morality are based on belief systems, and they could be religious, they could be spiritual. So you'd have to follow what the principles are, the tenets are of that particular belief system that you're applying your morality to. But that's just one type of morality. Morality is most often developed through our own experiences. My morals are based on my experiences in life, the things that I've gone through, the problems I've overcome, the awards I've received, the recognition. And then I think about, is that recognition that I've received actually based on my work, my efforts, or whose work did I borrow or build off of? And maybe it should have gone to them. So there's so many dimensions here, but specifically in morality, your morality is your own system by which you live. And I don't think that anyone can tell you the truth of your morality. It has to be up to you. Therefore, that's why I put emphasis on one's own development and engaging his or her own truth in practice, let's say. But ethics is a totally different story.
Exactly.
I also have a question. I absolutely agree with you about the fallibility of the human mind and the fact that we need error in order to get any truth. So between error and truth, there's no mutual exclusion, but the one needs the other one. So it's connects very well to my talk later. One question is, when you talk about error correction, do you think that this leads to a constant improvement? Because this sounds like the old idea of the cumulative truth, which was the goal of science.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was thinking about this morning. Where do we get, as a society, where do we get our truth? Well, we get it largely from science, evidence-based science, because there's a lot of pseudoscience out there. There's a lot of, especially in many fields of AI and longevity, a lot of patent pending products that are being sold in the market. So that's a lie right there. There's no truth in that. The only truth is, if they said this is patent pending, it hasn't been tested, we haven't done our assays, we haven't done our clinical testing, but we want to sell it to you. I would value that rather than someone marketing and pushing a product. But going directly to what you're saying, so science has been this incredible foray for us to wrestle with where is truth. But without the telescope and microscope, we would be wrestling with truth, unknowing what's out there. So thank goodness we've had the technology of the telescope to see through our solar system to the universe, to the Oort cloud, to beyond. How marvelous is that, and that we're able to see on a microscopic, almost invisible scale and move an atom. That is phenomenal. So many of the statements and the projections that people have made over the years of what is truth, like there will never, no household will ever have a computer. No person would ever need a computer. Well, we all laugh at that because it was such a silly thing. But when we have to check ourselves, what are we saying today? Then in our assumptions and our projections as scholars, and looking at the world around us, when we may not even be seeing the world around us because we're limited by our sensorial mix, our basic central nervous system, our peripheral nervous system, and what we observe.
No, I absolutely agree with you. Of course, the technologies are prolongations of our sensorial apparatus. So we expand them. Mm-hmm. We expand all the senses that are given to us, that we are endowed with. But my question is, do you think that, the idea of science is that they know more and more? I don't think so. I think that the shift continuously moves from one paradigm to the other one. And every paradigm shift shows more uncertainties, more doubts, more unknown things to be known yet. The more we know, the less we know.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the wisest statements. I don't know who said it, but it was one of the wisest statements. I think it was maybe Einstein. The more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. Yeah. And I think that's where we are with science. I think that's where we are with philosophy. Because if we take a look again at what Stefan created for us in setting up this workshop, object-oriented ontology, speculative realism, and new rationalism. Even those areas, they give us a glimpse at another way of looking at how we objectify information and how we observe our own objectification of information, that it could be askewed. So I think that I agree with you 100% that the idea is to continue questioning and admit that we don't know, but we're doing the best we can and we're learning. And I think it's very important to keep on asking those questions. And I get a little bit concerned when people espouse a platitude as a fact. And I even catch myself, and I make sure that I double check what I'm saying. But I mean, you could say death and taxes are facts, but are they really?
This is the real problem. What is a fact?
Yeah.
Independently.
I was particularly intrigued by what you just said about sort of things. There's a lot of fraud going on when it says sort of like patent pending, where it's not the evidence is not yet sufficiently there.
Yeah.
And I was just remembering the origin of the smallpox vaccination in the 19th century, which was basically just a doctor who came up with the idea of a vaccination, and then he consciously he developed it, he applied it to a young farmer's boy, and then he consciously affected the young farmer's boy, which is obviously an act which is morally not justifiable. On the other hand, it worked. And as a consequence,
on the other hand,
we nowadays manage
Yeah.
to get rid of smallpox. And sort of the question is, what are the sufficiently, can we say anything about sufficiently high standards when we can take the risk and to become proactive, even if the scientific evidence might not yet be sufficiently there?
Yes, I think so. I know here in the United States, the FDA is very dictatorial over what can be released and how many tests, and they prolong it way beyond necessity. And currently, the FDA is being really pushed to allow some of the vaccines for COVID to go through more quickly testing. But the issue here, and I think that what you said was really a good point, that Madame Curie, what if she violated some code by putting a petri dish in a dirty sink, and she lost her ability to practice her scientific research at that institute, then we, wouldn't have penicillin. It's so the mistakes that are made are wonderful, but that's not truth. It's when we market information and espouse information in ways that may not be truthful. That's the issue. So it's constantly, checks and balances on that. When I said patent pending, I was referring to the biggest industry right now is the longevity industry. There is more money being invested in longevity than the environment or energy. And this is currently. And so it's become an incredible industry, but not all the therapies or the products, let's just call them, that are being invested in have been tested. I think the prime example of authenticity and integrity there is taking a look at Elizabeth Holmes. And if you don't know her, she's in a major legal battle in San Francisco for creating a company and being worth $3.5 billion herself, just herself, for marketing a product that didn't exist. So in that regard, I think that, we have to consider our industry, and our industry here is philosophy and education, and looking at ways in which we develop the scholarship in philosophy and posthumanism and transhumanism and the future, and looking at the advances in science and technology that affect philosophy, because philosophy is all about existence, and primarily about existence of humans, since we write philosophies. So in looking at that, it's very important that we take responsibility about what our philosophies, what tools and ideas our philosophies are suggesting. And, posthumanism has gotten a lot of slack from thinking about, posthuman, you're not human anymore. And we all know that that's not what it means. The same with transhuman it's just, that's not it, but it comes out that way. So it worries me a little bit. And then, the fact that artificial intelligence and automation and robotics are uploading, downloading, cross-loading, the gamification of the world, the automation of the world, security, cybersecurity, your personal identity, and that all of that being assuaged into ways that could be detrimental to human existence or existence per se is a concern, to be sure.
We have a question that's just come up for you, so I will bring it to the screen as well, from Luke Robert Mason. We know Luke, and
yes.
He asks, don't we need post-truth to help science progress? Surely if we didn't have folks suggest alternatives to the present dogma, consensus truth, then we wouldn't have progress.
Okay, well, let's take a look at it. It's truth dogma. So Luke is brilliant. So I love this question. So yeah, it's great. And it really, it turns the key on our mental acuity. I don't know if we need to equate truth with dogma. I mean, what's dogma is what people say and push. Something becomes dogmatic when it is so self-referential that it doesn't allow for inquiry and questioning and exploring. But so don't we need post-truth to, okay, so let's ask Luke to define post-truth.
Luke, we'd like you to define post-truth.
So after truth or beyond truth? I think the only way I can see that, as we're waiting for him to respond, the only way I can see that is if we use AI, which I suggested in having an error correction playbook that is perpetually checking our reality to see if we're assuming something to be reality or if it's really reality. And then it would have to be changed per environment. Real world biosphere would have a reality. Artificial spheres, the architecture of like maybe a cybersphere or Second Life or metaverse would be different. Coexisting in some other type of artificial or synthetic environment would have another level of reality. Okay, let me try another way. So we'll wait. Okay.
Well, we have more.
Okay, well, I think that scientific method and faith or religion are very different things, aren't they? I mean, aren't they in different camps?
As we wait for Luke.
Here is another comment, a response to Luke.
I love this. It's really great. Post-truth. I guess post-truth would be if we're deluding ourselves about what is true. And we very well may be, as I said in my talk. Our truth is based on our perceptions, right? The world around us, what we interact within. But I know my dog is smelling things that I don't smell. And so there's different elements. You take quantum mechanics, quantum physics, that propose other realities or simulations. So the truth is that we don't know if we live in a simulation or not, right? All we know is this, what we have right now. And I think we're all coexisting in the biosphere, right? Everyone here is human and we are biological and we're in a physical world of oxygen and carbon dioxide and whatnot. And then we're communicating through this virtual venue. And that's, bottom line, basic truth.
There are more issues on post-truth coming up, but I guess we'll discuss them then at the very end when all the speakers come together. So many, many thanks again, Natasha. And further questions that will then be asked and discussed at the very end of the event. Many, many thanks.
I think this means something good, right? This is way cool.
Yeah.
Okay, way cool.
Very Italian.
It can have different meanings too, but
I mean it in a good way. I know what not to do in Brazil. I know what hand gesture not to do. I learned the hard way. Okay, so thank you very much, and I look forward to the next speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we will also get back to Luke's question at the end with a further discussion. But now I'm going to bring Professor Francesca Ferrando to the screen. While we wait for her camera to load, I will introduce her. Professor Ferrando teaches philosophy at NYU Program of Liberal Studies, and she's an adjunct assistant professor. She's the author of several publications, and her latest book is Philosophical Posthumanism, published by Bloomsbury. And her presentation is entitled Posthuman Perspectiveism, Beyond Relative and Absolute. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chrissy. Thank you so much, Stefan, Brunella, and thank you so much, Natasha, for this beautiful, beautiful presentation. That was very enlightening. I'm going to access this huge question that I've been feared to ask for many years, the question of truth. And my way to go about it in the past, and that's also reflected in my book. I wrote this book, Philosophical Posthumanism. There is a whole section about this, which is called Posthuman Perspectiveism, in which I kind of get out of the dichotomy, absolute, relative, showing that they are two faces of the same coin. So there is no absolute without relative, and there is no relative without absolute, to the point that you have, a phrase like, okay, if everything is relative, then that also is an absolute. So I realized that that was a slippery path, and it was also going back to the traditional dichotomies that have been really the foundational path of some type of philosophy. For instance, in the Western canon, you can think of clear dichotomies like female, male, black, white, east, west, good, evil, nature, culture. And in this kind of same path, you find the absolute and relative that get shifted. So, for instance, as some of you have mentioned, in the medieval tradition, absolute was considered the good, the God who was absolute, and relative was the individual perspective, for instance, of humans. And then that got shifted in the 20th century with postmodernism and the idea that all perspectives on some level are also relative. I realized that that game was a game I was not going to play because it was going back into a specific format that I was really trying to dismantle. So I realized that going back to that kind of tradition, I would find myself in the specific, using the specific tools that I'm kind of trying to dismantle. And as Audre Lorde said, you cannot dismantle the slave owner house with the tools of the slave owner. You need to find other tools. So I thought a lot about it, especially when I was writing my book, because this is a question that was coming, of course, especially if you work within the field of epistemology and ontology. And I found myself comfortable enough to say that I would be coming out of the tradition and using another tradition that I found much more comfortable, much more suiting, much more loyal to what I was seeing, which was perspectivism. And when you talk of perspectivism, there are many traditions you can delve into. Of course, in the Western canon, Nietzsche comes to mind. But you don't have to stay within the Western canon. You can go, for instance, in the Indian canon, Jainism, and the tradition of non-absolutism, which is really about accepting the multiplicity of viewpoints. Or, for instance, Amerindian cosmologies and perspectivism in the kind of tradition in which everything on some level is human, when human doesn't really mean human anymore, means who has the viewpoint, who is the subject, in a tradition where the subject is not separated from the object. So basically you would have animals and plants and stones that have a perspective, that are witnessing and experiencing as much as we do. And they have their own way to go about existence, which on some level connect to our way of going about existence. Because as Natasha was saying, we are in this together, and we're all different, of course. Now, that on a epistemological level, I think is very suiting. I think perspectivism is the way to go. That's why I brought this notion to the conversation today, to this beautiful workshop, of not having to insist in this dichotomical paradigm of absolute versus relative, but instead facing, absorbing, reflecting on this notion from a different tradition, which comes from different sources. And it's very important also for me not to stay in the Western canon, but really be loyal to the human species. And on this, I'm going to go to my second point that I want to make today. So the first point was, if we talk about truth within the paradigm of absolute and relative, we're going to be in a game of illusion that is never going to end. And some generation after us is going to say, oh, it's relative, and then absolute. It's not. It's a game that stands in specific type of categories that come with specific type of manifestations. This is why I think that it's a fun game. If you want to think about, Lila, the cosmic game, Hinduism, you can play. You can have some intellectual games, and that's fine. But for me, that doesn't talk about truth. So, what is truth? This is a question that I've been a little more careful to get into, because I know that is a very huge question, and I also know that my answer are going to be shifting in my life. COVID-19 for me was a great teaching experience in my life. And I'm talking about the existential historical moment of being alive during this pandemic. because I realized that there are some aspects of existence that we all share. I realized that philosophy can no longer be just an academic tradition. And me as a professor, realizing that it was really a huge insight. I realized that I had to be loyal to myself. And in an historical moment where people are dying, where people are losing their jobs, where people are suiciding, where there is big economical distress, with some other counter-positive aspects, like the ecological environment is definitely benefiting from humans moving less around. And so there are some, of course, everything always comes with different layers. But for the human, as a species, the pandemic has been traumatic. But trauma is not necessarily bad. It's an opening. In fact, trauma comes from Greek, which is wound. So you're opening a layer. And after you're opening a layer, there is so much going on there that was already there, but you were not able to see because you were too much caught in your daily routine. And we were stopped. We couldn't move anymore. On one side, it was social distancing. On the other side, like the fact that we had to locate it much longer in a specific space where, for instance, right now we are holding this event online. Normally it would have been physical. We're all in different locations. We're all in different rooms, and we're talking together. Now, with this moving less of this physical body, as the counter aspect of existence, in my case, for instance, there was a much deeper movement inside of myself of realizations. And I realized that in a moment where life and existence, it's so deep and so intense for so many humans, getting caught in games, like intellectual games, of what is absolute and what is relative, to me, didn't talk to me anymore. I needed more to go back to some kind of universal aspect of existence. That doesn't mean the universal truth that Plato was talking about, but realizing that there are aspects of existence that we all share. We all are here right now. We are all going to be dying eventually. Even when we talk about radical life extension, that I know that it's a very important topic for some people connecting today. Even with radical life extension, eventually we're going to die. Of course, death doesn't mean necessarily mean an end. It means a transformation towards what? It's like chemistry. In chemistry, nothing really dies. There is always only transformations. So I'm not saying that death is an end, but I say that death is part of us, is part of our existential realm, no matter what, even if we live thousands of years. We used to live 30 years. You read the Romans, and 30, if you were 30, you were considered old. And now 30, you consider very young. So it's not so much the quantity, but there are some aspects of existence that have to be recognized. In this kind of, coming from this perspective, I also realized that I had to be loyal. I had to be loyal to my species, and I had to be loyal to our historical moment. And our historical moment is not the same as it used to be for the Greeks or for the ancient Chinese culture or for the Indian culture. The planet is different. We live in the Anthropocene. There are thousands of species that are getting extinct every day. The planet itself is different. We think of the planet differently. Actually, we think it as a planet when it used to thought as a land. Our existence is different in the way that we are, for instance, manifesting through technology. I call it sometimes digital existentialism. I am connected, therefore I am, for some people, and at this point even more, when with social distancing, some people find themselves pretty much 24 hours a day in front of a screen, even when they're sleeping. The disconnection cannot be thought as something we're using, and cannot be thought just as something it's using us. It's not just about data, which is also about data, but it is also an existential experience, an existential manifestation. It's a phenomenology. So in that sense, being loyal to our existential condition in the 21st century means that the human cannot be thought in separation from ecology and from technology. In the sense, I realized that the truth is something that, on some level, it's connecting us to everything that's come before, everything that is going to come after us, and everything that is happening. Time itself is not linear, but the truth itself is constantly shifting. It's liquid. It's like water. Think of the Tao. The water is constantly shifting. The Tao, it's not a dualism. In fact, the separation of the Tao is not a rigid straight line. It is a curved. And space-time itself is curved. And we are evolving as a species, and we are evolving as individuals. So I would like to think, for instance, if we read Socrates, or if we read de Beauvoir, or if we read Confucius, or if we read the Upanishads, there are some elements of those traditions, of those texts, that are going to be talking to us, that are going to enhance our existence, because they are speaking to a layer of us that is still very actual. Think of an instrument with many chords, and you can play these instruments in different ways. Think of the truth in these ways, as a symphony, as a music, as something that is happening and is shifting as well. And in that sense, there are elements of those traditions that are going to be resonating with us, and others that do not. For instance, many of these traditions are racist, or sexist, or anthropocentric. And then, for instance, we can go to the Paleolithic, to the Neolithic, and understanding their wisdom, to their crafts, to the images. Those traditions were not written tradition, were oral tradition, there were visual traditions. And we can learn that there is so much there that still talk to us. So much of their wisdom is still with us. So what I would like to say about wisdom, that for me is very much related to truth, is the idea of being completely loyal to who you are. And who you are is, first of all, embodied. Doesn't mean physical. On this, I very much like, the proposal from Natasha that she developed in many of her work of having different bodies. In the future, but even right now, we already have different bodies. The body that you're seeing right now speaking is not my body. It's a projection of my body, but it is not the cave. This is not my shadow. It's part of me. It's an aspect of me. So in that sense, I would like us to be loyal to who we are by realizing that we are embodied. And one more time, when I'm talking about embodiment, I never ever just talk about physical embodiments. This can be oniric embodiments. Think of dream wisdom. Think how much dreams have influenced the history of humankind, to the point that throughout all the Paleolithic, Neolithic, ancient societies, dreams were considered a place of wisdom where you would find the truth, because you would be in a location where you could connect to different realms of existence. And think of many traditions, for instance, and think of Islam, how, for instance, Muhammad got her journey, her spiritual journey in a dream. Think of psychoanalysis, think of Jung. So what I'm trying to say here is that when I'm talking about embodiment, I'm talking of all the aspects of you in all the different manifestations that you have, which means, yes, in your physical endeavors, in your virtual endeavor, in your oniric endeavors, in your thoughts, in your thoughts, in your mind, in the physical reactions that your body have, in all that you are, because you're not just one, you're many. You're many because you're constantly changing, but you're many because your body is made of many beings. Think, for instance, of the biota in your guts that allow you to be healthy, that are thousands and millions of microorganisms in your body that are you, because you are a multiverse. You are not just one. So in that sense, when we start to realize all the different aspects of who we are, and the fact that we are not just one being that is separated. We are not just one truth. If I'm not breathing this air, I'm going to die pretty soon, probably within not even 1 hour. If I'm not drinking enough water in my life, eventually I'm going to die. If I'm not eating food, or in the Indian tradition of the guru, if I'm not getting enough sun, I'm going to die as well. What I'm trying to say here is that as we are interconnected, at a fundamental level, we come from other beings. In this, right now, we can think of us, for instance, coming from the biological heritage of our parents. We may have more than two parents. I know that, like, well, you will be too young, but there are already some babies who have been, their DNA have been connected through the of different people, but traditionally it would be at least two people, at least you would have at least two parents. So you would connect to all the biological heritage, and more, of course, all the cultural heritage that you would connect to all the people that you encounter in your life. And you, in your genetic heritage, that genetic heritage is not a straight line. Think of epigenetics and how that itself is an evolution, is changing depending on what you eat, how much you move, in which environment you live. So going back to us, what I want to say today is that truth considered as something absolute, that is separated from us, that is imposed upon us, that's something that I would not be embracing as a posthumanist. But a different notion of truth, a notion of truth that is evolutionary, that is shifting, which doesn't mean that it's radically changed from one day to the other, because nothing can just radically change from one day to the other. Everything is a process. But the truth is a process in which, for instance, we read Socrates, or we read, as we mentioned, de Beauvoir, or we go to some Paleolithic cave and look at these images and get the wisdom of the time. We can still find a lot of the chords of these wise elements resonating with us. But definitely not everything. Not everything. Even Socrates was, had his own limits. The way, the Greek culture view, Athenian culture view women or slaves was definitely not in tune with what we see. So what I would like to say here is that we can go back to the notion of truth. I personally been very much careful with this, and I've not done it, but I love the challenge that you got me with this workshop and truth. Really, can we talk again about truth? And I thought about deeply, and I was helped by this historical moment, and I was helped by our pandemic. I was helped by all the distress and trauma that we as a species are going through. And my answer was a brave answer, because we can only be brave in this moment. We can only be brave to say, yes, we can re-envision society. We can do anything we feel we have to do, because that is all that is left to us, is being loyal to our vision. And in that sense, I think that there are some aspects that we can call truth that are going to resonate not only with us, but with every existential being. And it is the idea of interconnection. It is the idea that is the wisdom of the mountain, if you think through deep ecology. And the mountain doesn't only think through a human-centric perspective. The mountain is everything. It's rocks, and it's plants, and it's wolves, and it's snakes, and it's humans, and houses, and it's all these elements. And of course, we can add now the internet and technology, and the radio waves passing through the mountain. So what I would like to say here is, let's be brave. Let's take this historical moment as a challenge of truth and wisdom, and not being caught into the mind games of traditional philosophy, and not being caught in the mind games of traditional politics, and not being caught in the mind games of our own families or nations or whatever we're taught, but stop and realize who you are and where you come from and where you're going. And think of that, you, not just you as this unique conundrum of species and experiences and dreams. You as part of a species, you as part of a planet, you as part of a specific space-time that is curved, that is constantly changing, that is constantly evolving. Thank you so much, everyone, for being together in this moment to rethink of the human condition. Thank you so much, Stefan. Thank you so much, Natasha. Thank you so much, Chrissy and Brunella and everyone, and Giacomo Maramà, who was one of my mentors when I studied in Rome with the beautiful, amazing experience for my PhD in Rome. So I'm so excited to have Giacomo Maramao speaking later on. He's an incredible mind and person. And thanks to all of you who connected today on a Saturday to talk about truth and wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Ferrando, for that really, really insightful and wonderful presentation. That's particularly important for our current moment. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions, but we'll leave that to the end of the discussion as we're running a little bit over time. So I would like to introduce our next speaker. Denora, I'm adding you to the stream. We have Denora Delfin, who is the founder and editor-in-chief of the Immortalist magazine and its hosting platform, the Immortalist Club. She's the director of the recruitment at the US Transhumanist Party and owner of Art Dimensional Studios since 2008. Her presentation is entitled Subjectivity is Free Will, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I would like to put together a slideshow. So I'm just learning how to do this right now. I'm trying to do the screenshot.
Don't worry. You can share your screen at the bottom.
Okay.
And make sure you have your PowerPoint open in the background. And
oh, I see. Okay. Can you see it?
One second. Give me 1 second. If you could try re-add it to the screen now.
Ooh. Sorry about that.
The wonderful things of the digital age.
Entire screen. Can it be seen now? If not, maybe we can just keep it. But there were two artworks that I want to show.
Unfortunately, no, we do not see it.
Entire screen. Okay.
We will just carry on perhaps without the presentation?
Yes, it's fine.
The floor is yours. I'll remove myself.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. Once again, I really love the theme of this presentation, especially today, given that misinformation is creating so much polarization, and it seems that it's going to get worse if you don't do anything about it. In this presentation, I will talk about three main areas. First, how truth in light of relativism has helped achieve social justice, but has also left us without concrete moral standards to guide our actions, which was something that was discussed before. Then I'll explain how truth in light of relativism can actually be used to build flexible value systems and moral standards to guide our actions. And I will conclude with a thought on how truth in light of relativism can also help increase human survival and adaptability. Relativism and truth as a paradox. According to Friedrich Nietzsche and other postmodern thinkers like Sigmund Freud and Albert Einstein, said that truth and knowledge can never be absolute because everything in life is relative. In other words, reality, and rightly so, is a construct. In line with this thought, there are no facts or absolute truth, only interpretations based on biased perspective. Therefore, all standards are arbitrary, and no one system can be more valid than others. This realization brought significant progress in social justice. In the article named Beyond Postmodernism by writer and integral thinker Keith Martin, he reminds us that it's no coincidence that institutional racism, sexism, ageism, and many other isms came to be exposed in the decades after postmodern philosophers first started to write about this, eventually leading to a whole series of laws in the West to try to correct them. Keith adds, the postmodern movement made a solid contribution by taking modernism to its logical conclusion. It served us well by pointing out all standards of judgment are based, at least in part, on some kind of cultural bias. In other words, the postmodern movement helped free up conscious and unconscious systems of oppression by deconstructing hierarchical systems that placed white men, literally, and as the measure of all things. While reasoning based on relativism has been hugely important in the development of human condition and morality, unfortunately, reasoning based on no defined standards or value systems has gone a little too far. We see this today with the rise of the cancel culture that is also trying to invalidate scientific progress. When life is seen only as a subjective and relative, it is extremely challenging to seek truths that are more universal in order to better guide our ethics and morality. One can speculate that the lack of coordination to contain and deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, can also be seen as a result of lacking a robust and resilient value system to effectively guide concerted action. Relativism in the service of reason. What is the meaning of truth? According to Wikipedia, truth is the property of being in accord with fact and reality. But if reality is relative, how can there be truth that we can rely on? The mere fact that truth is relative, fortunately, teaches us that some truths are truer than others, and equally some moral standards are more just than others. Keith Martin, in his article, explains some things can be relatively more true, more good, and more beautiful than others, even if we can't speak of these things as being rooted in an absolute. For example, a person who intentionally lies to hurt another person is less ethical and trustworthy than a person who, for example, will lie to prevent a child from getting hurt. Additionally, the mere fact that truth is relative also teaches us that no standards can ever be held in a fixed manner. Life is in constant flux, and we constantly must readapt our value systems following some defined parameters. For example, we think of biological death as an absolute truth, but we know today that there are species like the jellyfish Turritopsis darni that are biologically immortal. And we are also, through scientific and technological developments, on our way to be able to live indefinitely long, healthy lives. Upgrading meaning. Well, this is where I wanted to show digital artwork that I created in 2009, which shows two clones of myself in very very intimate but in kind of an aggressive interaction, and the image is there is, you can sense that there is pain, that there is discomfort, and basically this image, unlike postmodern artwork that focus on deconstructing ideas and are basically characterized by irony, this series of digital collages represent a call for the sincerity of expression by deconstructing to then reconstruct one's own identity built upon a truer understanding of reality and of the self. This series of images also represents the difficult journey of unlearning cultural conditioning in order to be able to expand limiting beliefs. These images also has Gothic and Caravaggio-esque undertones to symbolize a departure from the Dark Ages and a rebirth towards the pursuit of a true enlightenment. This series represents not a rejection of past knowledge, but building upon all the wisdom we have accumulated throughout history. In pre-Renaissance Western Europe, for example, scientific, moral, and ethical truth reflected the mythological Christian understanding of the world. For example, physical ailments caused by spiritual deficiency, and things like slavery, rape, torture were traced back to the Bible for justification. If an ethical decision could be traced back to the Bible, then it was moral or just. Today, unfortunately, misinformation continues to not only threaten the integrity of democracies, but also survival of our species. Without a base reality or a robust value system, we can all at least share similar understandings. We are extremely vulnerable to polarization and manipulation as we see it today. And the more globally interconnected we become, and the more dependent we are on emerging powerful technologies that allow for this interconnection, the more vulnerable we will become. A pragmatic solution. Can truth, in light of relativism, help increase human survival and adaptability? I agree with Daniel Schmachtenberger, Director of Research and Development and co-founder of the Neurohacker Collective. He says, if we can understand base reality, ourselves, and each other, we can start to get somewhere. Base reality as an instrument to establish more objective truth must therefore not only be approached from an integral and all-encompassing approach, but must also withstand rational and secular scrutiny in order for humanity to make sense of the world in a more unified and effective manner. To conclude, I will leave you with this question. Can truth, in light of relativism, help nurture greater conscious awareness through a clearer and concrete but flexible understanding of reality in order to establish a more tolerant, fulfilling, and egalitarian existence for all? If you feel inspired to write about this, I will be excited and honored to publish it in my magazine, Immortalist magazine. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And this is all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Denora. And I know the image that you were actually referring to, unfortunately, we couldn't show it now, but possibly at the end of the talk with the discussion, we could try bring it back to the screen. And I will now move on to our next, sorry to cut you off there, move on to our next speaker due to time. We have Baris. Baris, I'm going to bring you to screen if you'd like to activate your camera and your microphone. Perfect. Hello there. Let me quickly introduce him. Baris, excuse me if I can pronounce your surname, but Hiditlioglu. He finished his undergraduate degree in studied classics, and now he's finishing his master's in art history. And his research focuses on language and meaning production. And the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello. Today I want to talk about, in a way, what was the framework of this workshop. That is the negotiation of the position between relativism and absolutism when it comes to knowledge and epistemology, in a way. So the way I see it, the problem that we have that has liberated our perception of certain facts and certain dogmas in the last decades is, as we called, relativism. And indeed, I think there is even a stronger version of relativism that is even becoming stronger, which I would call absolute relativism or anarchism, that no statement of universal or complete truth or knowledge is possible. So I want to position myself firstly against this claim that no such claim is possible. And secondly, the thing I want to position myself also in relation to what we've talked about this a little bit before, what we call facts. So commonly, starting, I think, most clearly with Russell in the beginning of 20th century, we come to define knowledge or truth in terms of a correspondence to a certain set of facts. And even today, in daily lives and mostly scientific or rather empirical contexts, this holds still true. So in a way, we still look at a certain givens that we call facts, which are supposedly empirically observable and falsifiable, and ultimately compare our statements in sentences. If they correspond to a certain fact, they're true. If they don't, they're false. So the problem I have with this scheme is simple, and it has to do with the way we conceive the human mind and the relationship of the human and what is external. I mean, it goes certainly way back, I mean, to Descartes, at least, if not before, that the human mind is some sort of an active observer that makes observations and judgments according to some logical principles and whatever is observed, and condenses them in statements that later become coherent theories and a systematic approach that aims to explain whatever is happening outside. So this I have the problem with. I think this conception of reality, in a way, is not only inadequate, but also, I think, slightly misleading. I'm not going to comment on this much more, but the problem for me lies in this distinction between internal and external. And I think through these new technological advances and these new advances in our perception of these, that the exact what is internal and what is external is slightly getting blurred. However, I want to return to where I want to position myself today. So I said, firstly, against anarchism, which is rejection of any substantial truth claim. And secondly, against, as I said, this dichotomic view of human interior and exterior. So as a consequence of that, what we know is that we have two things that are relevant. Firstly, we have systems through which we explain, we interpret, we give meaning to, that we give truth value towards certain predispositions, which we call, in this case, propositions. So, for example, the claim, I'm going to use a very arbitrary claim, and actually not so arbitrary, but specifically a tricky one, that, for example, that Aristotle is the last great philosopher of antiquity. So here, the meaning of the statement is rather obvious, but the ultimate interpretation and the determination of the truth value depends on the extension we attribute to the word great. So if whatever we mean by great, if we mean by great, a great philosopher is one who produced work on all fields of philosophy, then this statement should be correct. But however, on the other hand, if we attribute the meaning, the definition that the great is the one who survives the most in the subsequent ages, Aristotle is not the greatest philosopher of last great philosopher of antiquity, because his works, most of them perished through medieval period. So when we have these two ways of looking at a statement, which is a relativist position, and I'm not saying that one is true and the other is false, what we are doing is that we are assigning a certain interpretation to a linguistic element that ultimately is determined by something else. No, I'm going to come back to this, what something else is. But before that, let's have a look at what is the interaction between these two interpretations. So imagine that I'm a strong advocate of the first interpretation, and I'm talking to someone who's an advocate of the second. Ultimately, the only way we are able to have a conversation, if we have it at all, is what is called the disquotational principle, which states that given that a rational agent can understand and appreciate the modus operandi of the other speaker, of the other agent, there could be a line of communication, even though there is a certain disagreement towards it. So this, I think, is one of the fundamental progressivist claims of 20th century philosophy. It has implications in language, it has implications in society. I'm not going to go into detail, but I'm just going to comment that it is true that two rational agents should be able to communicate and at some point have a dialogue, given that they comprehend how they interpret a certain term. Now, this two interpretations and the way we, in a way, approach to a truth value and truth claim is absolutely relativistic. There is no question about that. Now, what is it relative to is the more important question. Fundamentally, this relativism can be condensed into a very, very liberally used and very vague category of context. And what do I mean by context? By context, I mean a certain historical framework. By context, I mean a certain language. By context, I mean a certain set of beliefs. By context, I mean a certain set of observable statements. By context, I mean a certain facts that direct and determine the truth value of the statement. So this context is not, however, independent of the statement. So in a way, we can rephrase the statement, Aristotle is the last great philosopher of antiquity, as the deflationists do, as Aristotle is the last great philosopher of antiquity is true. It is simply a statement in this view, in this scheme, in a way, in this mode of analysis, is just a statement of truth of a certain statement. If you're a positivist, you take that statement as a fact, and if you are a relativist, you take that statement as a belief. So, as a consequence of that, I think the way we can approach this general interpretation of a statement as a statement of belief and a statement of fact, whatever and so on, whatever you want to say, is through providing it with a proper context. And this context cannot be alienated from the statement itself. So in a way, when the deflationist says that a statement is that P is true, what we are talking about is that a secondary frame of reference to that statement under which and only under which that statement is true. So let's call this some sort of a Tarski style language in which a certain proposition is true. The truth value of that statement is certainly inscribed into that language if and only if that proposition is an element of that language system. And here we can introduce the notion of knowledge. Knowledge classically is defined as justified true belief. I'm not going to get into that. But here maybe we can twist that definition a little and say knowledge, that a proposition is known, a sentence is known by an agent, if and only if it is strongly believed by an agent. And strongly believed in this case is there is adequate evidence for that proposition. What do I mean by evidence? So here I want to return to that what I called this correspondence theory of truth, where a statement is true if it corresponds to a fact. Now let's try instead and ascribe to a coherentist theory of truth, in which a statement is true if and only if it fits into different statements that are held to be true. Now, let's get rid of the truth and let's focus on knowledge. When I observe a certain thing, or when I assert a certain statement, my knowledge of that statement depends ultimately on a scheme through which that statement is meaningful. And that meaningfulness is ultimately what determines if I know that statement or not. For example, if, following that Humean example of red lenses in the eye and so on, if I were to think that snow is actually red and not white, I would be ascribing to that knowledge because in my perceptual and phenomenological framework, snow is white. What I see is red, and snow, which is in my mind red, is red. So if this is the case, then I can claim that I know that snow is white because I have a strong evidence for it, and I believe that is to be so. So now I want to leave that idea and transform it into how we normally define truth and knowledge in relation to each other. So if we stop defining knowledge in terms of truth and consider truth as a derivative of knowledge, which is that knowledge is a simple idea, which is a strong belief in a certain proposition, then truth is when the certain idea, the certain strongly believed idea is fitting into or is coherent within a system or a scheme of other propositions which are already strongly believed by the agent. So in this case, what we are achieving is a complete affirmation of this relativistic disquotational view that two agents can understand what the other mean or appreciate what the meaning is, given that they can translate the terms to each other. Check. The second is, as I said, anarchism. In this case, it is a little tricky to argue to this, but I think we can. So, given that a certain statement is true, if it's coherent to a certain set or a scheme of strongly believed statements, then there is indeed a possibility of falsifying a certain statement. It is not that a certain statement can always be true, but a certain statement can be made false, because fundamentally we are operating under a certain language. And what do I mean by this? What I mean by this is quite simple, actually. So we can divide this into a strong and weak kind of falsehood, in which a logical contradiction is basically weakly false. If I were to assert that snow is white and at the same time snow is not white, then that would be, in any interpretation of the term white, would be false. However, on the other hand, in a strong falsehood, basically, what I mean is a certain statement which involves a term which can be interpreted in a certain way attains a certain meaning that is not coherent with other parts of that scheme. So, oh, sorry, I'm just told that I'm over 15 minutes. So I'll be trying to wrap it up. So what I mean is that a certain coherence of terms and interpretations is what achieves this kind of somehow a correctness and incorrectness of an interpretation. And ultimately, I think through this, we can, through the scheme that I've just explained, we can still maintain an anti-anarchist view that certain statements are indeed true and could be argued and shown to be true, while at the same time not going through that line of dogmatism in which only, absolutism of truth, while maintaining a certain positive distance between what is this kind of traditional ontology of interior and exterior of human mind that comes to define whatever we do nowadays, and ultimately create a possibility for non-human or non-interior knowledge or mental statements in a way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Boris, and we will obviously engage in more questions at the end of all these presentations. I will be attempting to quickly share my screen. If you could hold on 1 second. All right. Hopefully you can all see what I'm seeing, and I assume yes. And let us begin. All right. So the lovely part about today is that we can handle the topic of truth from various disciplines and various perspectives. And I am a just graduated literature major with a psychology minor. So I will be looking at the topic we're discussing and conveying ethical insights through literary narratives. So I'm using this PowerPoint just so I can show you visually my progression of thought. And if we look at truths and the posthuman paradigm shift, we see that forms of dangerous universalisms, which were identified with the Western traditions, in our ethics, politics, and conceptions of social reality and historical progress, were founded in an anthropology in which essence or human nature I'm not sure if my screen is working. All right, here I'm asking again, is everything working correctly? Perfect. I will use it like this. Sorry, I was told my screen was black before. Here I am. Perfect. And if I play it like this, and just to make sure, Natalia, is it not working when it's in full screen mode, like this? I suppose it isn't. And if I present it. All righty. I will leave it just like this, no worries. As I was saying, sorry about this. So we look at the Western tradition, and our ethics, politics, and conceptions of social reality and historical progress were founded in an anthropology with the essence of human nature was fixed. And I had lots of animations, but what I wanted to say is we created dangerous binaries in this type of thinking. We had the serious, logical, and rational man, and we had the irrational and emotional and superfluous woman. However, with a shift in thinking, we move away from this type of tradition, and to highlight how we are now in a continuous creation and change. What do I mean by this? Well, I mean that truths have become implausible, and we realize that we're part of one world which is permanently undergoing alterations in all respects. And I often like to read literature through a psychological perspective. And it was a nice quote that Erik Erikson, a psychologist, suggests that in recent years, we've come to the conclusion that looking at relationships involves the psycho and the somatic, the psycho and the social and the interpersonal. So what we are seeing now is that the mind, the body, individual, and society are all related and influential and have always been. We no longer exist in categories. So what has literature got to do with all of this, and why is it important? Well, in the discipline of narratology, we have narrative ethics, and narrative ethics regards moral values as an integral part of stories and storytelling, because narratives themselves sometimes either implicitly or explicitly ask the question, how should one think, judge, and act as author, narrator, character, or audience for the greater good, or sometimes not for? So what I see narratives in literature as is a tool handed to the reader to interpret and contemplate the truths that are handed to us within a particular time and social framework. So what do we do with this tool? Well, narratives can be a helpful tool for promoting truthfulness in a particular political and socioeconomic and sociopolitical time frame, but also it allows us as readers to start rethinking what is presented to us as truth and to create an emotional connection, which at the end could enact a change in behavior. Now, all this sounds a little bit up in the air, and it's nice to ground this in literary texts that show what I'm saying. We can go back as far back as Chaucer, and with the topic of women. I'm sure we've all come across the Wife of Bath's tale at some point, but she opens this with a rollicking prologue, and it's filled with explicit personal anecdotes, and sexual euphemisms are everywhere, and then she launches into a tale about a pillaging knight. This is the Wife of Bath. And I have a nice excerpt here that I will read to you all. Obviously, it's in Old English. And "Ye blessed be God that I have wedded 5. Welcome the 6th, when that ever he shall. For sooth I will not keep me chaste in all. What mine husband is fro the world y gone, some Christian man shall wed me anon." And basically, what the Wife of Bath is saying here is that she has married 5 husbands, and should her 5th husband die, she will happily and easily marry a 6th. So, what does this mean for women and gender categories within this period and within this time frame? Well, we could look at it one side here on the left and see that she embodies everything that medieval men are said to dislike about women. She's overtly sexual, she's not particularly attractive, and she's bawdy and cheeky. At one point, even the character responds that they don't want to get married because of all these bawdy descriptions that she's explaining marriage to be like. And what she does is she weaponizes her sexuality to assert dominance over her many husbands. So maybe here we look at her using femaleness and sticking within this kind of category of women. However, at the same time, perhaps Chaucer is displaying how men, what they fear most is being treated the same way they already treat women. Perhaps this bawdy and cheeky narrative that the Wife of Bath says shows men fear the blurring of this line and boundaries between the male and the female, of subverting it or of erasing it altogether. So what I'm trying to show is that through a narrative like this, it leaves it up to the reader to start to question truths presented or categories and to blur the lines themselves. We can take this to another time. My particular favorite to discuss psychology is in Jane Austen. And Jane Austen speaks about identity and psychology and social faces. I'm sure we've all heard of Sense and Sensibility. And what Austen does is she explores what it means to be connected to others, disconnected, in a society that's really and overtly concerned with politeness, social obligations, and social movements. What we do is we have Marianne and Eleanor, the 2 sisters, and the dichotomous terms sense and sensibility are often read as models of cold composure or excessive emotion. Marianne is the excessive and emotional one. But if we read a little bit deeper, we can see that Austen's probably undermining the very binary that she's proposing. She puts these characters in really difficult emotional and social situations, in difficult relationships with difficult decisions to make and different identities to keep up. And also what she does is she explores something in psychology which is called, and in philosophy, mentalizing, which is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and think of what they could be thinking. And ironically, within this novel, the characters who possess a deep capacity to mentalize and to think about another person are those characters who are manipulated most by the end of the novel. However, because they have this deep capacity to kind of understand the difficulties of whatever is going on in the other character's mind, they understand others and can maybe recover from these experiences to form more fulfilling and in-depth relationships. So what we see here is a questioning of the inauthentic and authentic relationships and the type of roles that we have to keep up, again, left to the reader to blur the boundaries. We could move it to the Victorian period. A personal favorite is A Child of the Jago, written by Arthur Morrison. And this particular narrative explores a slum called the Jago, which is an absolutely festering slum and filled with violence and crime and dirt. And we follow the story of a little boy called Dickie. He was 7 years old. And Dickie grows up within this slum. However, Dickey also tries to get out of these conditions and become a better person. However, all these obstacles are put in his way that he ends up stuck in a festering slum and in this cycle of class and subjugation. And interestingly enough, it's not really overtly apparent whether Morrison is encouraging reform, social reform, or perhaps an extermination of these slums, in the way he writes and the way he vividly describes these conditions. So again, it's left up to the reader. In our first chapter, just to find a quote here, he describes these slums as a quivering red sky on the pavement. Some writhed wearily, longing for sleep. Others, despairing of it, sat and lolled. A character asks, hell, how far is that? And someone goes, hell, well, you're in it, in the Jaeger. And then in chapter 2, we get this contrasting image of the East End Elevation Mission and Pan-Sophical Institute, which is a group of people that get together to fix the problems within their community. And this group of people were the upper class and the uninformed, were also encouraged to debate and produce papers on literary and political matters, while still encumbered with the smallest knowledge thereof. And we have in this nice event the choral society who sang their lustiest, while little Dicky, the boy from the slum who I mentioned, is in the outskirts trying to seek and hide behind the pillars and in the shadows to try to find cake. So again, here we have the blurring of boundaries and the blurring of the categories of class presented to us, and for the reader to question and think of themselves. And now I'd like to bring it just to a contemporary example. We have Colson Whitehead, who is a contemporary novelist, and he wrote The Underground Railroad in 2000. Now, the Underground Railroad in this particular novel is a real actual train, and it's magic realism. And just to give us a little bit of perspective before I tell you more about this particular narrative, slave narratives were a common trope where we had the slave that escaped from the conditions they had, and oftentimes there was suicides. Here we have the Igbo tribe, which is a Nigerian tribe, and there was mass suicide in 1803, this is real, where an Igbo group that were singing were led by their high chief. And then at his direction, they walked into the marshy waters of Dunbar Creek, committing a mass suicide. These images I have here, we have the front of a big, big ship, and over it were nets to prevent the slaves that were being transported from jumping off and committing suicide. Again, we have another image here of the speculum oris, which is a device used to force feed slaves that refused to eat. And unfortunately, slaves were viewed as cargo. And Captain's log saw that 7.2% of captive Africans killed themselves at some point during the capture, embarkation, or along the Middle Passage. So, knowing all this rich and really horrifying history, Colson Whitehead tells the story of Cora, who is a young girl, a slave, and she escapes from the South to become a free woman, a free slave. And she goes to South Carolina and slowly moves her way up. And finally, she's free. She doesn't really belong to anyone, although they're trying to hunt her down. And she's working in a community. And the headmistress in that community, a white woman, says, oh, you're a special kind of girl because not many of the residents have adapted as you have. You should take it as a compliment for fitting into this white society. And then later at a doctor's appointment, Cora is told that lots of colored women are having surgical operations so they can no longer be able to have children. And the doctor says, the choice is yours, of course. As of this week, it's mandatory for some in the state, colored women who have already birthed more than 2 children in the name of population control. So here again, we have a really, really strong narrative kind of showing us the categories of race and how they are still really prominent and still evident in today's time. And we can draw parallels with the narrative that he explains. And let's ground this in real life, not just fictional stories that help us think about categories and truths. In 2002, at the US President's Council on Bioethics, we had Leon Katz, and he began his investigation into moral questions of modern biotechnologies with a joint reading of Nathaniel Hawthorne's short story of The Birthmark. And Katz, who is the chairman of the PCBE, maintains that the reading of Hawthorne should deepen our understanding of the meaning of a biomedical advance. So With all these narratives and examples, what can we actually take from this? Well, we can understand that there are particular religious, political, and economic structures that are framing certain truths presented to us in our particular time frames. And what we can do as readers and as thought leaders is to use narratives as the imaginative location to question and to blur and break the boundaries of what is presented to us, to question these truths. We can have dangerous fictions, which are presented as truths, and they can also be compelling. And we've seen this in history, and able to monopolize large amounts of capital and effort toward their realization. However, I regard, and we all should, literature as something important for creating an emotive engagement and a playing field in which we can contemplate. And with an emotive engagement and with this contemplation, we can start to enact change and to show how everything is really interrelated. And this is what we can take from literature. I'm going to hop back onto the StreamYard, remove my presentation, and say thank you to everyone. Because next we have our speaker, who is Natalia. Natalia, I'm going to bring you to the screen and ask you to share your presentation.
Okay, let's see if it works. Please tell me if you can see something, if it does work.
Yes, it works perfectly.
Okay, lovely.
Natalia here is a communications and art history student at John Cabot University, and she's interested in the visual fusion of digital and physical and the intersection of new media arts and social media issues that are related to digital images. She has a wonderful presentation, which is entitled Pixelated Truth, the Digital Image as a Medium. So Natalia, I'm going to remove myself and add your presentation is now on the screen. We can see it perfectly, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Firstly, I would like to say that I am really, really glad to be here and to be part of this virtual debate. Thank you so much, Professor Sogner, Professor Ottamarini, and Chrissy for organizing this fantastic opportunity for all of us. So, Pixelated Truth, the digital image as a medium. I believe that some of us have already seen a recent New York Times article that shows artificial intelligence generated pictures of people. Its introduction reads, "There are now businesses that sell fake people. You can buy a unique, worry-free fake person for $2.99. If you just need a couple of fake people for characters in a video game or to make your company website appear more diverse, you can get your photos for free on thispersondoesnotexist.com. And to give you a sense of what we're talking about, the New York Times article includes a fantastic visualization of what those fake people look like. So here they are. These algorithm-generated unique faces, not belonging to any real person, most of us would find indistinguishable from real people. Therefore, it's easy to imagine a not-so-distant future in which we are confronted with not just single portraits of fake people, but whole collections of them. At a party with fake friends, hanging out with their fake dogs, holding their fake babies. It will become increasingly difficult to tell who is real online. But this not-so-distant future is already here. And it's been here for a while, actually. The pictures that you can see right now on the screen represent Lil Miquela. She is a virtual influencer. And here, for a comparison, is an actual human being, a human influencer, and one of the most followed people on social media platform Instagram. But let's go back to have a closer look at Lil Miquela. This is her Instagram account. Miquela calls herself change-seeking robot. The company behind her, a Los Angeles startup titled Broad, claims she is an artificial intelligence-based entity. But it's a misleading statement, to put it delicately. Numerous news outlets, such as Vox, Forbes, and Bloomberg, pointed out that there is no AI and no wires behind Miquela. She is only an avatar, a mask, a digital image. But the money she earns and the 2.8 million followers she attracts are real. Michela collaborated with such brands like Prada, and she starred along supermodel Bella Hadid in a Calvin Klein commercial. She records her own music. Apparently, virtual influencers gain 3 times higher engagement than human influencers. And Michela is not the only one. There are estimated over 100 virtual influencers right now. This is Ima, a Japan-based virtual influencer. As you can see, she's interested in Japanese culture, film, and art. And here is Seraphine, a character from an online game League of Legends, brought to her virtual life on Instagram. These virtual influencers, however, are not existing in digital sphere only. They are placed in physical armchairs, eating actual hamburgers, reading actual books, and hugging real cats. And yet, despite their apparent desire to be a part of those physical spaces, they do not look real, and they do not try to look real. So I would like to ask why. Now, I would like to quote a passage of Giacomo Mercuriali that says, "We are on the brink of new visual era, in which most of the pictures we are going to face will be digigraphs, pictures that look like photographs but are not obtained through an optical apparatus." Virtual influencers are an example of juxtaposition of a digigraph and a photographic representation of the physical reality. This peculiar juxtaposition, or rather merging of the digital and the physical, is not new, however. This fusion of layers of representation of physical and digital reality is embedded in the very nature of digital image, because the digital image itself refuses the idea of the real. So before I go on with this concept, I would like us to take a moment to remind us about the characteristics of digigraphs, which they share with digital objects at large. So digital image, just as any digital object, is subject to algorithmic manipulation. It becomes programmable due to its numerical, immaterial nature. It is a subject to variability, meaning that it has no fixed state, but potentially infinite versions. Since digital objects have and are different versions, the digital image deconstructs the binary between the original and the copy. Thus, I believe that the digital image can be considered as a medium on its own, having perpetual circulation and alteration as its unique qualities. Hence, digital ontology, just like the one of music, is provisional and transitional. The digital image is by its very nature in flux. It has no fixed object state. The digital image is recreated each time it is downloaded and viewed and projected on various devices. The digital image is always transitory, with each performance recreating and manipulating it. Variations of the digital image cause its meaning to unceasingly transfigure and tweak. Therefore, we can say that the act of making an image has moved beyond that of creating it. Now it is the act of remixing and altering, remaking, combining, and reformatting which actually produces images, digital images. Digital images are therefore post-produced, as Hito Starrell puts it. At the beginning of this presentation, when I quoted the concerns expressed in the New York Times article about the near-future confusion between the fake and the real, I said that we are already living that future. What now slowly, I hope, becomes clearer is that it can be said that the digital image refuses the idea of the real by merging rather than juxtaposing the concept of real, unreal, digital, physical. It is a perfect space to introduce such novelties as virtual influencers, because it is not that much that borderline between what is truth and what is false that is hazy. Because for the digital image, this borderline does not really matter that much. I would like to show you now some examples of comments that users wrote under Little Mikara's pictures. So we have, you look so good. Wait, but you can't get COVID, Lamao. Happy Thanksgiving. What do you think about humans? Do you dream of electric sheep? What seems particularly uncanny is that a lot of users who follow virtual influencers want to engage with them. Moreover, they seem to want to have those virtual influencers be more sophisticated than they actually are. It is an outcome of a misleading description of virtual influencers by the companies that manage them, which I mentioned before. For instance, little Michaela claims that she is a robot, even though she is just an image. But it also seems to be a symptom of the user's willingness to embrace this, to embrace our superficial instinct to connect, even if the being on the other side of the screen is a robot. So if we take virtual influencers as social experiment, it does not only show that to a certain point we are already ready to accept this integration of digital and physical, it proves that some of us are already projecting our desire for an emotional connection with AI to robots capable of empathy, anticipating singularity. Virtual influences could easily take the form of fake faces showed in this New York Times article that we looked at a while ago, but they don't. And one of the reasons why they don't is, I believe, that they don't have to. We want them to look digital, to not look like humans. Thus, virtual influencers could be analyzed as a particular type of cyber phantasmagoria, a term coined by W.J. Mitchell. Cyber phantasmagoria relates to the quality of digital images to provide an uncanny spectacle, showcasing the mesmerizing force of the digital image in increasing our detachment from both the physical and the digital reality. The image to the left, or rather a recording of it, is another example of cyber phantasmagoria taken to its finest. It comes from a Reddit page, social media platform Reddit, titled Fifth Word Pics. This page is dedicated to some kind of surreal images that are supposed to come from a different uncanny universe. So we know it is an illusion, but we love it anyway. And this leads me to the final issue, or perhaps a hypothesis, one of many that could be related to the things I touch on in this presentation. So digital images can be both invalid in terms of their truth value, however we should redefine it or understand it as, yet they are able to create their own truth amongst the hyperrealities of the digital space. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalia. And we will obviously be taking questions at the end. I will remove you from the screen now and add our very own Professor Antomarini. And a quick introduction. Professor Antomarini teaches aesthetics and contemporary philosophy at JCU. She's a pluridisciplinary formation, ranging from epistemology to anthropology. And her latest book, just come out, Le Macchine Nubili, has been released a few days ago for Castelvecchi Edizioni. And her presentation is entitled Truth is a Theory of Errors. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Chrissy. So I see from the previous presentations how also on the chats that there are concerns about two things. That is the paradox of the paradox of relativism. That is, what is relative tends to the universal, of course, and on the other side, how to avoid dogma, because when we say universalism, we are not talking about universality, but about the dogmatism that results from any claim that a universal judgment exists. We have dismissed in philosophy this claim since, I would say, in all the 20th century has been marked by the attempt to overcome any claim of universalism. And we don't go back to that, of course. Now, the problem is how to get rid of this dogmatic universalism without falling into the logical paradoxes of relativism. My view is that we have at least two philosophies that can help us get out of the paradox. One is pragmatism, and the other one is cybernetics, in a very wide sense of the word, in the sense of how cybernetics introduced certain elements that would branch off in many other philosophies that can be used today. Pragmatism, instead of judging according to the causes, which means according to laws that claim to be true, we should, as we do actually, judge according to the effects. So far as the effects are good, we keep them. So far as they result to be damaging or bad, we replace them. This does not yet guarantee that the effects are good, but as maybe Natasha introduced quickly, errors can be, the effects, if erroneous, can be corrected. This overcomes definitely the necessity of the truth, but keeps what must be kept of the truth, that is its contingency. Any contingent choice can be constantly corrected by any other contingent choice. This is what in cybernetics is called the role of the effector. When we receive an effect, we have two choices. One is to passively react on them, and the other one is to actively retroact on the error, which is called the effector. Effector is an active effect, is a creative effect. We can invent our way to dismiss that part of the first effect that was damaging, keeping or correcting or decreasing its damaging energy or increasing its damaging energy. In this way, we can solve the problem of the truth, reducing it to the good, renouncing its necessity, as also was said by, let me see, the fluid truth, maybe Francesca. The truth is fluid, is in a constant process. We might also refer to Whitehead here. So we renounce the fixation of the truth, the fixation of beliefs, what Peirce called it. And we accept the fact that the truth is constantly moving away from the past toward being constantly projected onto the future. This helps us avoiding imposition and dogma, without falling into the misery of philosophy. This is a vague recall to Karl Marx. The misery of philosophy is endlessly discussing about the truth, back to the Middle Ages, back to theology. Instead of endlessly academically discussing, we can be confronted with effects and with the possibility to turn this effect into creative invention. And this is what technologies are. They are effectors that try to put a remedy to what is wrong, to the previous causes, and correct and improve. And here I want to add, improvement does not mean progress, because progress is another universalistic notion, because general universal progress does not mean anything. I see there's something of some comment in the chat about that. I would replace progress with improvement. On the one side we improve, on the other side we change a paradigm. Vaccines have saved many lives, but have also changed our biological structure, because now also the ones who are not naturally selected survive. And vaccine means artificial selection, but artificial selection means that we have to face Another, population growth. We have to face how to feed more people on Earth, etc. This is just as an example. So what is the truth cannot be absolutely relative, be reduced to the personal. Personal doesn't mean anything in philosophy, because the problem remains the common good. The truth means what is the common good. The common good itself is shifting, implies a constant paradigm shift, and therefore I would also add paresia. Paresia was also mentioned indirectly. Paresia was what Plato, retrieved by Foucault, calls the courage to tell the truth, which doesn't mean the universal truth, but the courage to tell the truth that corrects the previous error, which is risky, but also creative. So the creative and the risky go together in the effort to go ahead. I would conclude with Kant. Kant said, not the Kant of the first critique, still imbued with the problem of science and universality, but the Kant of the critique of judgment, when he faces the weaker judgment, when we are deprived of any objective universality, he still says, when I like something, I claim that everybody likes what I like. So claim means communicate in our ways to creatively overcome an obstacle. And in this constant sharing, the claim claim means that there's no objectivity, but just a claim that there should be one. In the constant subjective sharing of our ideas, so we can have a convergence. Convergence means something that will be contingently changed, modified in the future. There's no way out from there, but there's a way out from radical, paradoxical relativism. Thank you. Thank you, Christy.
What a word.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Now I will give Professor Sorgner a quick introduction before his presentation. Professor Stefan Lorenz Sorgner is a world-leading metahumanist philosopher and a philosophy professor here at John Cabot University in Rome. His, with numerous publications, and his presentation is entitled Truthfulness, Mindfulness, and Impulse Control as Means to Strengthen Autonomy. Floor is yours, Professor.
Many thanks. So yes, originally I wanted to focus more also on the topic of directly of truth, but rather now I'm going to focus on more on truthfulness. In particular, because it's been recently raised to me, or it's often raised, whether does the use of digital media in general increase the likelihood of this non-truthfulness, of inauthentic decisions, of us getting steered by social media. And there's a widespread worry that digital technologies via social media, advertisement, politics, they all undermine one's own authentic interests, one's own truthful interests. And this thought often gets explained further by reference to how Facebook was used during the 2016 US elections to influence the voters by means of personalized advertisement based upon a big data analysis of each individual user. And this is a social challenge which needs to be seriously considered. So the challenge for each one of us is to be ready to analyze oneself, understand one's own wishes, longings, and desires, and accept them too. So even if one has some kind of understanding what is in one's own interest, it can be difficult to stick to one's own interest. And that can have several reasons, like the weakness of will, like lack of impulse control, strength of external forces. But we all have our idiosyncratic desires, our forces, our longings, our wills, and our interests. At the same time, there are strong external forces which have created second natures in us. Sometimes we incorporate them into our being. Sometimes we don't even realize the tensions between our second natures and some more fundamental idiosyncratic drives out of which we are constituted. And sometimes we are afraid of living in accordance with what we long for due to fear of external pressure, punishment, or some other kind of sanction. So realizing which bunch of our idiosyncratic tribes are most relevant to who we are is a daring and difficult challenge. Being able to distinguish between a central longing and a second nature which was created by external forces, it can be difficult. To be true to oneself, to realizing one's own interests, desires, longings, and to be determined enough to stick to them is a complex and challenging enterprise. So some virtues seem to be particularly relevant for strengthening one's own autonomy. And all of them can also be promoted by means of education, but they can be refined and developed further by means of by other technical enhancement procedures. In order to increase the likelihood of us making authentic decisions, it's in our interest to technically enhance these virtues besides promoting them by traditional educative means. And the post-human virtues I have in mind are truthfulness, mindfulness, and impulse control. Truthfulness stands for the basic stable attitude to be courageous enough to want to realize one's own drives and to be ready to accept them. Mindfulness analyzes the variety of interrelated drives in which we're embedded to be able to realize the diversity of one's own interests. And furthermore, impulse control is supposed to guarantee that one is strong enough to stick to one's longings besides all the obstacles which one gets confronted while doing so. So truthfulness implies the readiness, but also the capacity to embrace the multitude of our forces. And this can be an extremely tricky challenge, in particular if one has grown up in a restrictive environment with rigid laws concerning good and evil, strong truth claims, so to say. So it might be the case that one already suspects that one's own longings don't correspond to the socially accepted demands. And this is where truth, strong dogmatic truth claims really become extremely dangerous and violent. Yet whether one takes the stance to be truthful to oneself and to accept the stance is a further issue and demands a lot of courage. Education can be a helpful tool for promoting truthfulness by being confronted with literary text in which internal struggles of the protagonist are being dealt with, such that one realizes that one is not alone with one's own struggles. Scientific studies have also revealed the potential of certain psychotropic drugs for promoting truthfulness. If these drugs are taken in the appropriate setting and under psychoanalytical guidance, they can be a means for opening up to being truthful towards one's own drives. And psychological and medical studies by Stanislav Grof, for example, are particularly noteworthy in this respect. Mindfulness is a virtue which has its origin in Buddhism. And as a consequence of the scientific work by John Kabat-Zinn, it has increased in relevance in many aspects of our life world. Even Google has established a mindfulness center in which the mindfulness trainers get trained besides mindfulness meditations being offered to Google workers. So mindfulness allows us to analyze the relevance of various interrelated effects in which each one of us is entangled. Scientific studies have revealed that and how mindfulness can also be promoted further through technological means. For example, there are indications for nicotine promoting the attitude or virtue of mindfulness further. James Hughes has given a wonderful TEDx talk on radical mindfulness in Rome many years ago when I also gave my first TEDx talk there. Therein, he analyzed various pharmaceutical ways of enhancing mindfulness. And it needs to be noted that there's been a long tradition of enhancing mindfulness technologically. The tea ceremony has been employed as mindfulness training for centuries. And during the tea ceremony, 3 elements are particularly relevant. So it's firstly the bodily practice of the ceremony. Secondly, the appropriate surrounding, the setting, the sounds, the pond, the koi fish. And thirdly, the psychopharmaceutical effect of the tea, which is being consumed. And that has always been an essential part of that ceremony, hence also of the mindfulness training. So it becomes clear that it's implausible to regard psychotropic drugs as alien to mindfulness. And the third virtue, which becomes relevant for promoting authentic decisions, truthful decisions, is that of impulse control, which seems to be particularly relevant for success, complex capacities, and the likelihood of living a flourishing life. Consequently, there have been a significant amount of studies which were dedicated to the topic of promoting impulse control technologically. One drug which was particularly successful concerning impulse control was that of tolcapone. It must also be noted that various psychotherapies represent a promising method for dealing with the issue of impulse control. Obviously, the aforementioned reflections merely represent a glimpse into the multifaceted and complex field of research on the technical enhancement of virtues. But all I intended to reveal as part of these reflections will challenging does not have to be a crucial one. That means it doesn't have to be the case that the use of digital media increases the likelihood of inauthentic decisions. We can also do something against it, both by educative means, but as well as by technological means. We can promote our virtues, the stance of realizing our actual desires and realizing in the life world. So given that the virtues of truthfulness, mindfulness, and impulse control get promoted both by means of traditional education as well as by technical enhancement of these virtues, it can rather be stated that thus technologies can strengthen our autonomy and together with it, the likelihood of us living a good life. So many thanks for all your attention.
Thank you, Professor Sorgner. You're getting so many wonderful comments for your talk. Our next speaker is unfortunately a keynote speaker who couldn't be here live today, but due to the digital world, I will be showing a recording of his presentation. And a quick introduction. Giacomo Maramao is our keynote speaker, and he's an Italian philosopher who teaches theoretical philosophy and political philosophy at the Roma Tre University in Rome. He also has his book Against Power, which was published by the JCU Press in 2016. Now, bear with me, I will share my screen and bring his presentation. And it seems to be working perfectly.
Of my speech is etsi homo non daretur, as if there is no human being, robots, androids, simulacra. I propose to approach the new frontiers of the transhuman, starting from the intertwining of robotics, artificial intelligence, genetics, and from the way in which this new frontier is situated in a war in which the digital infosphere has increasingly transformed into a virusphere. It seems to me that Donna Haraway moves in a similar direction in her book, Staying with the Trouble. But in several of my works, I have come into discussion with the perspectives outlined by Haraway from my book, The Passage West to Against Power. The origin of this event, the spillover of the virus from animal to man, is soon said. It is the extractive violence that Homo sapiens has exercised on the animal and plant life forms of the planet. Hence, a paradoxical consequence. That same anthropocentrism that appears antiquated and pathetic in the face of intelligent or even thinking machines is instead arrogant and predatory towards the natural biosphere. The prophecy of Philip Dick, an author whose philosophical relevance I have in the past. No longer external nature, but the same internal nature, the same body and the same human mind to be subsumed under organic machines capable of reacting autonomously with the environment. However, it is necessary to consider that for obvious biographical reasons, this point of reference is constituted by the cybernetic paradigm in the version of Norbert Wiener, who had worked on the analogical relationship between human behavior and that of some machines, assuming the study of machines as a source of information about our behavior. With a hyperhumanist and at the same time theologizing move, Dick Overton's Wiener's analogy, placing the study of ourselves as a key to understanding the logic of an artificial world of which we were the creators, but which is now destined to surround us and get around us. In short, according to Philip Dick, machines are becoming more human, yet real bodies have experiences that are inaccessible to artificial intelligence algorithms. And the minds of real bodies possess an active memory whose creative potential has an unbridgeable symbolic surplus compared to the most supersonic of passive and stored memories of an artificial mega device. Furthermore, today the emphasis is rightly on the power of hybridization between animal and machinery, determined by the intersection of robotics, artificial intelligence, and genetics. But in the meantime, the frontier of experimentation seems to have moved towards the potential represented by the characters of the plant world, a world that transmits to us the model of a syntax without semantics, an operational system without links, if not instrumental, with real life. Here comes to mind the post-cybernetic systemic paradigm of a sociologist like Niklas Luhmann, for which the living and the human individual himself were nothing more than the environment of the system. But the analogy stops there. we now see a further paradigm shift, no longer from cybernetics to autopoietic biological system, but from the animal model to the plant model. The study of plants has now become a fashion also in philosophy. But the most relevant novelty is still represented by the paradigmatic revolution determined by the development of scientific research on plants. Here, the plant metaphor breaks in as an explanatory key of the potential contained in the network, overall intelligence that can do without the hierarchical structure that organizes life in the animal world. In the animal world, the brain holds the command post. Plants do not have a central control room, but instead have widespread sensory skills, perception and communication. For this reason, they can represent a paradigm for the robot, revolutionizing and decentralizing the very concept of intelligence. This new frontier comes to meet with the perspective of the transhuman at a precise point of intersection. The idea of the multiple self as a plurality that gives rise to a superorganism which is in turn inserted into the mega-organism of a radically redefined universe, no longer unidirectional, but multi-directional. A dynamic multiverse close to the Renaissance couple of microcosm and macrocosm, where what was once called identity passes from a substantial model to a reticular model, thus marking a definitive departure from the vertical paradigm. The outlooks just mentioned, however visionary or even imaginative they may seem, exert a strong influence on technological research, posing crucial themes destined to open the question of humanity, its meaning and its prospects to the great challenges of the future, the overcoming of the centralistic hierarchical model propitiated by the use of the metaphor of the network could in fact also meet the idea at the moment, utopian idea, of a global humanity politically organized in a large federation, according to the criterion of a universalism of difference, where identities, as mentioned above, are no longer roots but transcultural paths, and the difference is no longer a mere practice of resistance and self-preservation, but a generative syntax of a new universal. But faced with the new scenarios outlined by the new frontiers of the posthuman and of the transhuman, it is increasingly difficult to resist the impression that an important threshold of modernity has now been irrevocably crossed thanks to developments of biotechnology, imposing humanity to redefine its position on the planet through a double negotiation, on the technical side and on that of the animal and plant biosphere. And while the secular thinking continues to insist on the clause etsi Deus non daretur, as if there is no God, the new stakes now seem to have displaced elsewhere in a threatening farewell from the human proposed by the self-referential artifice that finds its compendium in the formula etsi homo non daretur, as if there is no human being, unless the biotechnological mysterium incarnationis prophesied by the visionary genius of Philip Dick does not make us sooner or later find the presence of an anthropomorphic android who, to a question like what is the climate of our time, answers first letter to the Corinthians. Then it is perhaps possible to conclude that the problem of the post-human, its disorienting side, consists in its too close relationship with the truth. Okay.
I was fortunate enough to have been on that call with Professor Maramao, and I did let him know how unfortunate it is that we couldn't have live questions with him, but I'm sure it will spark his insights will spark a lot of questions at the end and discussion. Now to move on to our next presenter, Professor Dario Cecchi. I've brought you to screen. I will give you a quick introduction. Professor Cecchi is an assistant professor of aesthetics at Sapienza University of Rome. His interests range from the 20th century interpretation of Kant's critique of judgment, Arendt, Caroni, Lyotard, to pragmatist aesthetics, and the response theory applied to cinema and the realm of imagination. His last publication is an essay on Lyotard and the Sublime, published as a contribution to the volume Kant's Critique of Aesthetic Judgment in the 20th Century, De Gruyter, edited by Stefano Marinaro and Pietro Tezzi. His presentation is entitled Political Relativism, a Challenge to Posthumanism. And the floor is yours, Professor.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be after Giacomo's talk. I'm sorry he's not here with us, but I imagine my short remarks is a quick commentary to his talk. Actually, I'm happy that he's mentioning 2 or 3 aspects which will come back in my talk. The first one is the reference to a novel, to Philip Dick, to a novelist, because I want to first of all to try to consider this perspective of post-truth, alternative facts and bullshits and the rest as from another perspective, which is how are we dealing with politics after postmodernism. That is, I would like to emphasize this after postmodernism, because I believe that we are living a passage from postmodernism to another phase of our political forms of engagement or commitment to actuality. And at the moment, I have no better definition than calling it postmodernism. And let me explain what I mean. I'm, of course, thinking of Lyotard's definition of postmodernism, which is very quick to explain. It is mainly the idea that since the second half of the 20th century, we are witnessing progressive shift from ideologies as being considered as a real scientific, sometimes, interpretation of reality, especially social and economical reality, and then as a tool for political action. But the emphasis is on the scientificity of these interpretations. And since a certain moment, especially, let's say, after 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet Empire, we see the decline of ideologies, which is regarded by Lyotard as a sort of transformation, or if you want, as a going back to the original source of ideologies, which he considered as narratives, as he says, a sort of grand récit, of great narrations of modernity. I believe that now we are witnessing another passage in politics, which is the fact that we are actually dealing most of the time in the public debate with narratives. But these narratives are so important to our political discourse, especially for the fact that we are post-ideological, that we are living in a post-ideological politics. I don't believe that Trump or in Italy Salvini, but I would say, for the sake of fairness, also Obama maybe, or Conte in Italy, are very ideological, although they sometimes use very harsh messages and slogans like "Make America Great Again." Let's say just one example. But these harshness depends exactly on the lack of a real ideological basis. So there are narratives for the sake of narratives. So this is my idea of why we are dealing so much today with post-truth. Of course, I don't want to exclude completely an epistemological or a logical approach to post-truth, which I believe it is very important indeed. But my perspective is rather that of a specialist in aesthetics, and I think that we cannot forget that also the narrational frameworks are very important to understand how these happen. And I refer to one of the previous talks. I just want to suggest that politicians often just behave just like the virtual influencers such as Lil Michela, whom were mentioned before. That is, their marketing strategy, their communication strategy is mainly based on algorithm. So it is not based, once again, on any ideological basis. Neither Is it based on a human-oriented search for consensus? But it is based, it relies on a sort of faith on the good functioning of algorithm. In Italy, for instance, we know that a good part of Salvini's communication strategy was, at least in the first phase of his career as a minister and political leader with the Movimento 5 Stelle, etc., was based on the functioning of a mysterious system called La Bestia, the beast. We don't know how far they applied algorithm to understand how to orient their leaders' strategy in communication, but nevertheless, it is true that this was the trigger for establishing an agenda of communication and an agenda of political action. Therefore, what I suggest we should do is to recover also an aesthetic approach to post-truth, which means to consider this post-truth also as a narrative fact. And don't forget that these narratives happen on a social media, so they are multimedia. They use massively pictures, audio, visual devices, and the rest. So in a certain sense, we could apply the same logic of cinema to this narrative of the post-truth. And the logic of cinema, since ever, is mainly based, at least when cinema is considered as a fact of fiction, as narrative in the ordinary sense of the word, it is often based on the idea of a spectacle of attractions. So we need to be attracted, we need to be captured by a narrative. We need to be attracted by the vividness of these pictures, which are moving on the screen, in order to become spectators and to feel a sentiment of engagement in the story. And a very influential theorist of cinema and a filmmaker himself, Sergei Eisenstein, he was a Soviet member of the avant-garde, suggested that one way we can deal with this spectacle of attraction, instead of exploiting its powers to the extreme, was to reverse its logic into an idea of montage of attraction, a montage of attraction, which means to reconsider this attractiveness of pictures by the means of editing, by the means of the work, the elaboration we can have of these pictures, in order to understand their logic, in order we could also add to unveil sometimes the truths or the fake truths they convey to us. And in this way, in order to become critical spectators of these motion pictures. So this is the second idea I would like to suggest. If we want to deal with post-truth and alternative facts, we have to understand that this is the logic of a machine. It was in the earliest 1920s the logic of the camera. Today it is perhaps the logic of algorithm, but what we have to do, it is to understand the logic of algorithm, not just to accept it or to prevent ourselves from enjoying the enlargement of information they can supply, but also, or more hopefully, to approach them with another logic, which is the logic of montage. That is the logic of deconstructing the narrative and reconstructing it according to a new sense, with the objective of discovering other possible information inside the official information. So, in other words, my idea is to reconsider today's political narratives as aesthetic ideas in the Kantian sense, that is, as imaginary representations, which are not imaginary in the sense that they do not deal with reality, but in the sense that they are not necessarily directly referred to any single phenomena, but they help us enlarge our perspective on reality. And the only criterion we must always keep in mind when we deal with it, in order to avoid the fact of being tricked by pictures, by image, is that if they enlarge our perspective, they give us much thinking to do. So if narrative makes us in the condition of thinking, and especially of critical thinking, it is a good narrative, no matter whether it is fully true or not. In a certain sense, I am referring here to a concept which was developed in a Kantian vein in 2010 by Pietro Montani, who was professor of aesthetics in Sapienza, when he spoke in his book L'immaginazione intermediale of this concept of autenticazione, the validation. So in a certain sense, we must consider today's political narratives not as being authentic or fake, but rather as processes which might lead us to validate or not validate certain phenomena, which can be political movements, campaigns, and so on. Considering also that the counterpart of many of the problems, of the issues we are dealing today, like the Novax, I'm mentioning the most famous worldwide, the most famous targets of these post-truth debate, like the Novax and other campaigns. They often give rise, or are the counterpart, the pandan of the emergence of new political subjects, which are often not political parties, but rather more informal movements. So to conclude, my idea is that in an age so deeply marked by the post-truth, what we should do is to consider narratives as a sort of chronotope. I'm using this concept from Mikhail Bakhtin, Aesthetics of the Novel. The chronotope is this concept which was coined by Bakhtin, also with a certain Kantian inspiration. The chronotope, in Bakhtin words, was to be considered the transcendental aesthetics of the novel and of any narrative at large. That is the, let's say, a priori condition, spatial, temporal condition that we need to understand the sense, to grasp the sense of a narrative. For instance, we couldn't, this is one of the most famous example brought by Bakhtin, we could not understand the Hellenistic, the late ancient romance in which we find heroes who can pass sometimes years and years before they are able to fulfill their objective, which is usually marry their belle. And what happens in these narratives in that if we should consider them with realistic temporality, we should imagine that a young man and a young woman at the beginning will marry only when they are old, which does not happen, for instance, in these romance, because it does not obey to this condition of a realistic spatial temporal condition. It obeys to another condition, which is a chronotype based on a metaphysical idea of cosmos. So we have to decipher, in a certain sense, the post-truth according at each time. Of course, according to the chronotype it's behind it. And the best way is to shift, if we want to analyze especially this aspect, if we shift from the message as such, the message in itself, and we consider the narrative framework, and if we consider how the narrative framework makes the story effective in its reception for us, that is, what kind of bridge it is established between the space and time imagined by a post-truth campaign, for instance, and the space and time imagined in the space and time we actually live in reality. This is true to me also, to conclude, for the issue which is very influential today, especially in progressive circles, of the Anthropocene. I'm not completely sure that the Anthropocene designates a scientific reality. I'm still wondering to what extent Anthropocene describes phenomena, really describes phenomena, or to what extent it is a narrative which might help us to re-establish a new chronotype for a political discourse which would be, so to speak, left-oriented. So in that sense, it might be useful to distinguish at least the two levels, and not in order to create a sharp distinction or to foster an anti-scientific approach, which is sometimes reproached, for instance, to Lyotard's postmodernism, but in order to understand the different issues at stake in the post-truth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Cecchi, really, for such an interesting presentation, and relevant too. And I will now remove you from the screen and bring Professor Massimo De Lutri and do a quick introduction. Professor De Lutri teaches philosophy of language, philosophy of multiculturality, and philosophy of literature and art at the University of Sassari, Italy. He's president of the Italian Society for Analytic Philosophy, as member of the Italian Society for the Philosophy of Language and of the European Cultural Parliament, and as director of the Scuola Superiore di Sardegna. His latest book, Putnam, recently published, Rome 2020. And I see you are sharing your screen. If you can go to PowerPoint now, and I will add it to the stream.
Okay. Can you see it?
Everything is perfect. Would you like to go full screen? And you may begin. We can see everything. Thank you, Professor.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chrissy. So thank you to the three organizers of this workshop for inviting me to deliver this talk. So in the brief written presentation of this workshop, reference is made to two isms, universalism and relativism. Of universalism, it is said that it is dangerous, and of relativism, it is said that it is necessary. And so the notions of truth we can imagine that stem from them. They are dangerous and necessary, respectively. I agree with this, and I would like to make a gloss about these two claims. So let's begin with universalism. I think that universalism is false, rather false, or at most uninteresting, and relativism not only necessary. I actually don't see what's the meaning here, necessary, connected to relativism. I just would say that relativism is based on a fact, or is a fact. Now we'll see in a moment what I am meaning with this. So to begin with, universalism. I think that it is just false that propositions on deep ethical, aesthetical, social, political, etc. issues can have a universally valid correctness, or equivalently an absolute truth value. This is something that we can experience on a daily basis, in a sense, that this kind of issues cannot have simple solutions, or a solution that can, on which the agreement of people coming from different cultures can converge on. And hence the danger. The organizers of this conference think that is connected with universalism, I think, because purported universally valid proposition might be used as a weapon by people in charge of the power, and giving rise to practices of, so to speak, truth instillment, where what we have is, truth with a capital T, which is expression of given community within a given society, the community which has the power, and where truth is what has to count as the truth is inculcated in the mind of people with well-known means, and this is why I think that universalism is false. But it could at most also be uninteresting, in which sense that those few propositions that we can take as universally valid don't say too much about us, about who we are actually, don't speak to our problems, our existential problems, the problems that we have to face on a daily basis, for example. And I'm referring here to important things, of course, the truths of logic and mathematics, or analytic truths, but they can be considered as universally valid, but as are uninteresting as far as our deep existential problems are concerned. So, propose B, relativism. I would say the relativism is not so much necessary, but a fact, in the sense that all we can say cannot but be tied to the culture we happen to belong to the culture we happen to be members of. And in what we say, there is an inherently relativistic coloring, so to speak. This is just a fact. And rather, what is false, on a par with universalism, is radical relativism, the radical version of relativism that sometimes is connected with the idea of incommensurability between theses, claims, propositions coming from different cultures. So the fact that what we say is based on the principles and values of our culture, the fact that they are relative to our culture, doesn't mean that we are doomed to be close in our culture, so to speak. Doesn't mean that radical relativism is a sound position. We are not close in our culture just because we can criticize the principles and values we inherit with the tradition, so to speak. We inherit from the received view, let's call that way. We can criticize our values. We can criticize our basic principles, modifying them or substituting them with better ones. This is something we actually do. And again, the fact that what we say is based on the principles and values of our culture doesn't mean that truth is a fake. Sometimes it is said that truth doesn't have a content, that is a fake, just because one more or less works from dichotomy between truth with a capital T, which means absolute truth, universally absolutely valid truth, and no truth. Namely, the dichotomy, the idea is that if we cannot have truth with a capital T, we have no truth at all. And since we cannot have truth with a capital T, with a capital T, is absolute truth, we just end with no truth at all. This is false. This is a false reasoning, of course, it seems to me. And so truth is not a fake. We can say something true, and we can reach objectivity in our conclusions. Only that, again, it is not an objectivity with a capital O. It's an objectivity, humanly speaking, an objectivity we can attain, we can reach. So we can say actually something true. And how? Well, if we avoid being bipolar, so if we avoid dichotomies that like the ones I just mentioned, or also dichotomies like the dichotomy between fact and convention or fact and value, and try to take a third path between, here I quote Isaiah Berlin, the Sheila of timeless abstract principles that take no account of life and change, and the Charybdis of relativism that destroy morality or reduce its goals to matters in the end of subjective temperament or inclination, then, if we do this, then many good things follows, including intercultural discussion. Then we can see that we can attain a level of objectivity, of validity, objective validity in what we say. We can say that our thesis, our claims, our propositions are actually true or false, depending on the case. Also on an intercultural basis. So there is something we save as a certain room for intercultural discussion. And this is something that our intuitions capture, our pre-philosophical, pre-theoretical intuition capture. We won't engage in a discussion, for example, if we thought from the very start that no agreement would be attainable. And of course, agreement means converging on a objective basis. Okay, from our brief discussion of A and B, it follows that truth has a content. And here there's an important point to make. In talking of truth, we don't talk about the mysterious things. we talk about propositions being true or false or neither. This is a way to bring, so to speak, truth down to earth. Now, with this in hand, there's a further step to take. Truth is no monolithic thing. Truth has many faces. Truth is both one and many. And this is the stance called alethic pluralism. And this is the stance I want to propose you tonight. Alethic pluralism draws an interesting moral from the secular discussion about truth, namely that the traditional theories of truth, the theories that the Western tradition that were put forward in the secular history of the Western tradition may be right, each in their own field. Nobody is as so to speak, universal validity. No one of this theory can apply to any kind of proposition, irrespective of the content of this very same proposition. But each one has a validity in its own field. For example, the correspondent theory, which, by the way, is the oldest theory of truth we have in our tradition. The correspondent theory functions well in the empirical world. The coherent theory functions well perhaps in mathematics and logic. The superassociability theory is the right stance to take in order to evaluate whether propositions about the arts or the moral dimension, so ethical proposition and aesthetical ones, are true or false. The pragmatist theory may be useful in the political dimension, and so on and so forth. And the idea of alethic pluralism, in a word, is that there are many different properties in which a proposition can be true, and therefore there is more than one way to be true. And which property it is that renders a proposition true may vary according to domain of discourse. The idea is that the world has many levels, many dimensions, so to speak. The physical dimension, the ethical dimension, the aesthetical dimension, the political, social, and so forth. And each dimension open a domain of discourse, so to speak, so that we can use this or that truth theory depending on the domain of discourse we are in. And this shows that the concept of truth as an open texture. It reflects the variegated use we make of the word true on a daily basis, both in ordinary and professional contexts. So both when we use this word, when we apply the word true to proposition of our ordinary experience, or when we apply this word true to proposition in a, say, scientific, when we are scientists making our experiments and the like. In conclusion, from the falsity of both universalism and radical relativism, we can discern a third path which allows us to talk of truth. And the best way to talk of truth, according to me, is subscribing to alethic pluralism. In this way, we gain a good elucidation of what truth may be, an elucidation according to which truth is deeply tied to our practice, or in other words, as the organizers write in the brief illustration of this workshop, to knowledge, agency, and systemic relations. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Massimo De Lutri. I will be bringing Professor Sogna and Professor Antomarini to the screen now as well, as we reach a time where we will have our final discussion and take some questions. Professor Sorgner, should I bring a few more participants to
Yes,
speak?
please. Let's directly. I would directly love to address a question to Massimo. It was an intriguing presentation. I'm wondering what the implications are for moral circumstances in the life world. Basically, when there is an issue concerning that, because once you deal with a question like stem cell research, abortion, what is the moral status of an embryo? How can your take on the notion of truth then be applied to such an issue? Because here it's really where people fight. No, they want to have either. They usually it makes it different which stance you take in the practical circumstances. Are you allowed to make research with stem cells? Are you allowed to abort the embryo? Such a middle decision can be rather problematic, and I'm uncertain about the implication you have in mind.
Oh, thank you for this question, Stefan. Well, I think that the answer is pretty simple. Of course, the problems you were mentioning, those moral problems, are very tricky, very deep, and combine a lot of different elements taken from different fields: medicine, biology, ethics, and so on and so forth. In this case, we can say that we can reflect upon a given proposition. Say, for example, abortion is a good thing, or this is a stupid example, just in order to make us understand. We can reflect upon a given statement, an ethical statement, for example. And when all is said and done, namely when all the arguments are given to back up this or that positions, and when all the experiments are done, when there are no empirical elements, for example, to bring to the issue, then the position that is backed up by the best argument count as true. So we can use the word true in this case. It is more or less as what Brunella said before, when he said that we use truth and then we apply the word true to some of our statements, some of our proposition, and then try to correct our errors. It means that in that case, at the beginning of that discussion, what is the best position counts as true, okay? But this doesn't mean that it is eternally true, so absolutely true. If in the future some other members, fellow members of these societies come up with another argument of bring in some other empirical element, we can reopen the discussion and re-examine things. But I think that, so this is something progressive, you see, in this case, in cases like this. But you see, we can't, with no problem, use the word true and say that we have, for the time being, some truth to work upon.
Yes, if I cannot, sorry, Stefan, maybe you want to answer.
Yeah, no, I'm sort of, yeah, but you're already, the question here is you're already presuming sort of empirical evidence. And the counterposition would basically say, but you're misunderstanding. Like since the 60s of the 19th century, the Catholic Church has declared that animation takes place with fertilization. The divine spark enters the human body at fertilization. And this is not something which you can analyze, which you can realize by means of empirical evidence. And that's why it could never be resolved in that way. This is sort of the challenge once we get confronted with these positions.
Of course.
Of course,
oh,
yeah. Best possible objectivity that Massimo brings about can be problematic if we still think of objectivity as something fixed. That is, abortion is either right or wrong. But abortion is a matter of fact. Again, women have done abortion in many different ways since women exist. I don't know. So it's not a fact of it's not a matter of being right or wrong, but it's a matter of giving certain results. That is, women won't ever accept it to be forbidden, independently whether it is right or wrong. Independently, it's a matter of fact. It's in effect that it's a necessity. And if by chance, science confirms what the church said, that the fetus suffers, we have the technologies. We have the new technologies to bring about a new solution, a new effect. So I think that there's always some struggle that does not confirm or falsify the right or wrong, the fetus suffering or not. It's a matter of fact that sets in motion the army of rebellion and the army of the technologies supporting women in this matter of fact of what they need to do once in a while when they want. So it goes back to Francesca's idea that the truth is in process. So it's a matter of processing this. It goes back to Dario's talking about the critical spectator. So I for instance, I am against abortion, but if I am critical, I can understand why a woman makes abortion. So it's a matter of really getting rid of this idea that abortion is right, abortion is wrong. Abortion is what has happened forever, and it happened forever because it's an effect. So that being right or wrong is irrelevant.
Yeah, of course, it's just could add this that say abortion in general is right or wrong is a silly question. One has to see these cases on a case by case, on a cases basis. Otherwise, in general, would be nonsense. As I think
the law needs to be universal. It's general. So Stefan's argument is
there's a question for which.
Can I say something, because this is a kind of delicate argument? Can I say something about abortion? Because I think that it doesn't feel right for me to talk about these kind of issues as it was some type of science. I mean, we're talking about bodies, we're talking about people, and we're talking about experiences that women, especially women, because until now, abortion has been a woman experience, and it has been a physical experience. It's not been just an intellectual experience or an emotional experience, and they're all there. But I would like to say that this attitude of talking about abortion as something that can be rationalized and written down and say, okay, these are the right aspect and these are the wrong aspect. I think that approach is completely wrong. It goes in the tradition of science in separation, specifically from women, because science in the Western tradition has been done by men. Even the whole process of abortion has been taken from women to men, when the whole process of pregnancy has become a medical endeavor. And I would like to say that, when we are talking about consciousness, I personally absolutely think that everything is conscious, and that probably the embryo obviously is conscious as well. But that's not a consciousness in separation from the mother. We cannot think of the embryo in separation from the mother. So for me, of course, I don't think that anyone would like to go to an abortion. But I think if women eventually go through that choice, I think that it's something that we have to consider, like Brenda was saying, case by case. And it's something that no one can tell you what you should do with your body. I mean, we have some laws that passed during this administration in the US, where they even forbid women who were raped to actually get an abortion, who got incest actually to get an abortion. We're talking about something that is not about abortion anymore. It's about patriarchy, it's about control, it's about violence, and it's about coercion, and it's about, sexism, all these other elements. So I'm really, I kind of get a little frustrated when I hear about abortion is just an intellectual discussion. And I think that we should have the voices of women who have gone through that experience and listening to them and understand that I don't think that any woman wants to do that. But if they got to that choice, they should be absolutely respected, because there is no separation from the mother and the child. And it's not that this child is there in separation from the mother. The child is there existing through the body of the mother, through the consciousness of the mother. So I would just like to make sure that we are sensitive when we're talking about debates that are not intellectual games, and that we are really getting the voices of everyone involved, and we don't go into the typical academic approach of talking about others, like, Spivak said, let the subaltern talk, let the people who are involved on this talk. And unfortunately, about abortion is always other people who are in power, usually men, deciding on women's bodies. So that's something I just like to say before we move on to the next chapter.
It's not an intellectual discussion. It's actually a very, as I said, it's a matter of letting
your sound.
Want.
Sorry, I think that Natasha's sound was very problematic just now.
Sorry, I didn't hear Natasha. Sorry.
Natasha, I think you need to log out and log back in again in order to get the sound right. I think that there's a problem with the microphone. Sorry.
It's very futuristic, Natasha, your sound. You sound very from the future. Real transhuman, but we cannot understand you with a human voice.
Maybe you can get out the channel and get back in again as you did earlier, and then it hopefully works again, because the microphone doesn't work. Sorry. Yes, Brunella?
Sorry, no, I was saying I agree with Francesca that the discussion must not be intellectual, but this is exactly why we need to discuss the level, the juridical level, because the juridical level that Stefan brought about involves a decision that is not a question of bodies, it's a question of law.
I wasn't. The reason why I addressed the issue was not a legal one. It was, we talk about truth, and by addressing the issue of moral truth, the issue comes out that there's a strong claims and violence and force which goes along with truth claims, and this was all I'm trying to show.
The laws.
Is my sound okay? Am I still from the future? Okay, first off, I really feel uncomfortable when there's discussions about abortions. People die. I almost died. Okay? So I think it's a discussion. I agree with Francesca that it's, it's a conversation that can take many different turns. So I just wanted to know why it was being discussed here. Yeah. And if it's generally discussed, I'll probably leave the room. If it's discussed more particularly concerning truth and philosophy and certain morals and ethics, I think that's interesting. But I think the whole topic is too heated. It'd be like talking about Black Lives Matter or talking about whiteism. Yeah. I don't know this is the place for that, because it will, we could have a very heated and incredibly intelligent discussion on just, whiteism, since everyone here is white, and the ridiculousness of it, and even the term privilege. No human is privileged. And that even, so I think the bigger issue here is where's the truth? And you mentioned this, Stefan, it's the truth of the matter. We're getting, information is so obfuscated, and it was presented by almost every speaker in some way, through whatever media, social media, the news, whatever we're reading, plagiarism and academics, which we all have experienced. I see my research being bandied around with people putting their name on it, and it just breaks my heart. Yeah. So, but those are all different areas. If we're going to talk about any of these topics, let's approach it from an area of really smart, effective levels of where the truth lies within it and what the relativism is. That's all I wanted to say, because I couldn't talk before, and I was just listening and wanting to leave.
It's not about abortion. It's about the moral truth claims and the violence and force which goes along with it. Once you
giving birth is violent. Let me tell you, if anyone has given birth here, very painful.
That's why I said when we talk about any kind of moral truth issues, it's very difficult to find sort of a middle ground, because here some decisions need to be made.
There is no moral truth. Your moral truth is your moral truth.
I agree with you. I don't think, but many people in the life world have such a claim.
Yes, they do. You're absolutely right.
And this is the challenge which we need to confront, I think.
But okay, so Stefan, where is that moral truth? Where is that usually stated? And it was on the side list when we were talking about anthropomorphic human hegemony, and even that concept is so outdated. We don't even need to go there. We all know that the human is not the center of the universe, like the Earth is not the center of the universe. We coexist in a system with so many life forms that we have to have a cooperation with and a balance with, and navigate it to, I hate the word together, navigate it as a connectivity. But I think we need to stay away from moral truths. And I don't know what so let me ask you, Stefan, what is it that you would like to receive from this discussion? What are you looking for?
No, for example, what kind of truths can we, in the field of morality, can we uphold? For example, this would concern neocolonialism then. So what's the status of an expanded health span by means of the latest...
that would get into ethics then. So, okay. So
in the field of biotechnologies, if we offer a certain drug in India, where sort of they used to pray to a certain goddess in order to be cured from the disease, and now but the praying to the goddess is not very effective. But it's a local tradition, and now we offer a certain drug which has a reliable an effectiveness to cure the disease by 95% of the chance, with a chance of 95%. And then here, this works. The people want to be cured from the disease, but on the other hand, a local tradition gets destroyed. It is seen as a neo-colonial approach. So what
isn't that the same everywhere? For example, in here and in other countries, we have Christian scientists who do not go to the doctor. There's Pentecostals who prefer not to go to medical doctors. There's people that are outside of any type of religious or spiritual group that don't want to take vaccinations because they're influenced by an actress who says it causes autism. So it's,
Can I step in, sorry, because I think that we're going to really I think we have like kind of a couple of minutes left, and we're going to this huge question like abortion and vaccines. And
right.
I would just like to say that I don't think that it's either or, I don't think, for instance, Stefan, that it's not or you pray to the goddess or you take the medicine. I know a lot of Indian people, actually there is a huge posthuman community, which is really amazing in India. And they don't have so much, they don't think in these binary terms, or I do this or I do that. It's more of a syncretic, like mix of hybridization. Okay, I take the medicine and pray to the goddess. And so I do, maybe don't pray to the goddess, but, maybe meditate. So I think that we really should try to avoid this would become kind of like a cultural relativism, which is something that I personally don't support in any way. I think it is more about kind of an evolution of society, of species that we are, and realizing that everything is constantly shifting. Again, even our perception of truth. Even Socrates, if you read Socrates, a lot of makes sense. Some still does no longer make sense to us, because there are some elements of truth that still resonate with us and others that do not. And that's fine. That's when I feel that we really need to be loyal to what we see without necessarily going to these paradigmatic things. Okay, it was like that, and then we go like this. And I know that in academia, especially in the West, it's really focused on, okay, now we killed the generation before us, and now we have the truth, or now we really got it. I think that we really should move on this. I think
that you just said the core of transhumanism, where post-humanism well, let's take postmodernism, kick modernism to the curb. Oh, it's bad and bad. Scientism is bad. Normality is bad. All these things are bad. Here, we're going to create postmodernism. And to get through reading postmodernist rhetoric is really, you know, people make fun of it. Every nugget of fascinating intelligence is like written like a Buckminster Fuller, you know, mile. It's so I think that what you were referring to was something that was in the chat window about postmodernist subjectivity or subjectivism. And I was thinking about that, and what you're doing is you're countering it. So how does that feel for you, Francesca? Because you say that it's your moral truth is be yourself, be who you are. And I agree with you 100%. Find who you are and be it. But that counters postmodernist subjectivity or subjectivism, which is saying, you know, we shouldn't feel, we should look at the others all the time. So where's the conundrum there?
Well, for me, the self is not in separation from others. Actually, the self is not one but many. Like, again, think of all the biota.
And how can you be real and be truthful to yourself if you're a composite of many? So where is your identity in all of that?
Because for me, the one and the many are not in separation. And this, again, like Jainism and a lot of Indian tradition are really helpful. That's why I think that posthumans should really go outside of the Western tradition, because there is so much out there can really help us in understanding that one and many are not separated, and we are one and many. Even the one that we are now is different from who we were even 1 minute ago, even on a physical level. And not talking about, you know, like...
So you're talking about the human connectome. It's like the human connectome is we're all bits and parts of each other.
Also, think I like the matter of the ocean. You know, think we are oceans. We are constantly, you know.
I kind of want to be an individual. However, I don't mind being part of everyone else and have everyone else part of me, but I don't want to put that on anyone. You know, it's. I like being an individual, frankly. It's kind of like the idea of, oh, everyone's going to upload and become Arthur C. Clarke's, you know, a childhood's end. We're all going to become one in this. And I go, no, I don't want it.
Okay, but one is not the one in the Western sense. It's not a close one. I
know. I've been to India. I'm spiritual. I meditate. I do yoga. I understand it all. But still, I still prefer having my identity and preserving that, my consciousness. So
I probably have the worst job to do now, and that is to bring and tie all these ends, because we could really go on further discussion. But what I would like to do,
we can all, Chris, we can all, if all presenters the chance now, after all the discussion, to give a brief final statement, one after the other in the same round in which they presented. Sort of to sum up what were the most important issues they encountered today, what was particularly fascinating, what triggered their understanding, Natasha, you were the first, so I asked you, unfortunately, I put you on the spot now.
Okay. I was pondering that as you were pulling your idea together. My takeaway is that I've loved listening to every single speaker, and I find a bit of myself in what everyone has said. My takeaway is that truth is not, truth can't be just put on a table and observed. You've got to be in the truth and then see out of it. So it's almost like it'd be a wonderful experiment to be in some kind of truth and see how we all think and feel within that truth. So I guess to do that, we'd have to find something that we all consider to be true. And that's a challenge in and of itself.
Thank you very much, Natasha. And we should move on to our next speaker, Professor Ferrando. Your conclusive remarks.
Well, I would like, first of all, to thank everyone, because this was really an enlightening meeting, and thanks even to the bravery to choose the topic on truth. I mean, I would have not dared that, and I was at first a little skeptical. Truth, why truth? But yeah, of course, let's talk about truth, and let's talk it in a different way, because now everything is different, and we can do that. Now we have the power to realize that society doesn't have it to be in a certain way, and we can think in different ways. And I think that what I take out of this incredible meeting, I would say that that I think no one agreed that there was a truth, with the capital T in separation from us. I think on this we were all on the same page. And I think that also everyone agreed that there are some type of, like evolutionary, like open flux type of truth that we can really, connect and realize that there is something for us there. So for me, what I would like to end with is the idea that truth is constantly changing on some level, and that it is our duty as being part of this space-time, as existing, as manifesting, as being part of this species, to stop, realize where we are, who we are, how we are, and being able to talk about that, and be able not just to rely on things that has been said before us, not just on, on other voices, not just what is going to be told in the future, but be the one who are able to say what we feel and how truth and why truth in that way resonate with us.
Thank you very much, Professor Ferrando. I will bring Denora to the screen now. One moment, since we're going in order. And Denora, hello, you're joining us on screen. If you could have your concluding remarks or insights just to wrap.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. This was really absolutely fascinating, and I'm very, very thankful to have been invited to this. Yes, the question of truth is really something that I myself been very interested about, because I'm somebody who I really desire to I'm inspired by a very profound desire to see less suffering in the world, and for people to be able to find ways to get along. And the fact that there is so much confusion and fragmentation and polarity, and people really seem like they're living in different realities because we don't have a shared common understanding of reality in basic things. When we know that science, for example, can give us a truth that might not be absolute, but at least are closer, as opposed to having an opinion or supposed to believing something out of faith. So I think this is a very, very interesting conversation, and I believe that it is, if people could all get to a place where we could at least come to an agreement that certain ideas and certain concepts can be closer to the truth when they can be not justified, but when they can be validated through the scientific method. I think that's a very good start, because at least the scientific method gives us some more grounding, and that's something that it gives me hope, because it's something that if we are able to think of reality as something that it is shared, that is something that we all are part of, then it doesn't matter what we believe in terms of what started the universe or where are we going after we die. But if we are able to at least have a more general idea that are more scientific based, I think we could get closer towards working together. And I agree with Professor Francesca in that it is really counterproductive to take a position, right or left, or to be relative and to go for relativism or absolutism. There is truth in everything, and that's the beauty of being open to all ideas and all teachings that have happened throughout history. There is, if we are able to be open to at least find that truth, even if it's something completely different, I think we are all going to be able to see that at the end, everybody wants the same. Everybody wants to be healthy. Everybody wants to live in harmony with everybody. So we all have a common desires. And right now, with the issue of misinformation, is something that it's going to take a lot of conversations like this to get somewhere. So I'm very, very, very thankful for this opportunity, and thank you so much. It was really, really inspiring and enlightening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We thank you. Next on the list was Baris, but I don't see his video connected. Baris, are you there? If not, I will jump to myself. I mean, I always love to speak about literature, and I think people get bored about it. Why are we referring texts from 500, referring to texts from 500 years ago? But as Francesca Ferrando said, Professor Ferrando, we're all connected in some way, and we're trying to find who we are and how we are connected. And I feel like literature is this playing field and this tool, stories are, in which we can explore this. And it has been over time. And it also has this emotive engagement, as we've all been really emotionally in how engaged in conversation in this particular workshop, and everyone got a little bit worked up. We have stories and our own truths that we can look to narratives to connect with. And it's actually, in psychological research, it shows that through emotive engagement, we can actually enact a change in behavior, not simply knowing about issues, but connecting with these issues. And that's why I really do cling to stories. And again, we should also just be careful of the stories in this time of misinformation, the stories that are presented to us and through media, and the truths that are presented to us. So it's good to keep this awareness and to obviously sometimes visit these fictive lands presented to us in literature to use critical thinking and be more aware of what is presented to us. And with that, I would like to bring Natalia to the screen.
Thank you so much, Chrissy. So in addition to, or rather repeating what everyone said so far, I'm so thankful to be a part of that debate. And it's been such a stimulating discussion. There's been so many issues that were brought up and so many interesting ideas that were showcased. So I'm so thankful that I could be a part of it and be able to be here and listen to all those marvelous ideas. What I think is really beautiful about that is that we had what we had here, what I think is very important when we approach the topic of truth, namely a very open-minded, honest debate. And I appreciate it greatly that I could be a part of it and could listen to all those opinions. So that's really lovely. And for me, what was interesting for, let's say, my field of interest is that how we can see technology as both an opportunity for our enhancing our understanding of cognition and our cognition of truth, but at the same time as a threat and as a manipulation. I think that it's interesting to see that those two opposite sides of what technology is, and then the range of possibilities that we have sort of in between. I think that was really, really lovely to sort of have visualized here. So thank you so much once again.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And we can move on to Professor Antamarini.
I think that I got a lot from this discussion, really rich. The problem is not, of course, to defend the relative. I think that on this ground, all of us agree, of course, as anti-universalism, anti-dogmatism. The problem is how to pass from the arbitrary, because the relative means arbitrary, to the convergence and the common good. So I also take advantage to answer Fabrizio Conti's question. What is the common good if this common must be left fluid and dynamic and not fixed into dogmas? So my view of it is that the arbitrary as the chaotic starting point of a kind of order that grows upon itself through constant error correction until an order that can be also juridical, because the juridical concerning abortion is not secondary. Laws of nature, laws in the moral fields, juridical codes need to be established. And what Massimo said, of course, this is the objectivity that we cannot escape, but at the same time these codes must be left fluid and dynamic in order to allow for the arbitrary again.
We just have Natasha saying goodbye. She has to leave now. Thank you.
We can't hear her voice.
We can't hear her well, but we send all our love back and thank her for her presence. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Professor Antoine.
I actually have to leave too. But thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
We could move on to Professor Sogna, and then lastly, I will bring Professor Cecchi and Massimo De Lutri to the screen too.
Yes, I was very happy to see that basically there was so much hesitation of any strong notion of the truth to be embraced by all of the presenters. I still see that in the life world, we actually get confronted with loads of much stronger claims of truth concerning people's own perspectives. And so in the life world, this seems to be much more widely shared, that one claims that one has some kind of absolute truth in correspondence with the world. In particular, it comes out when we talk about moral issues, because here there are either or decisions and we need to take a stance. In particular, then when it comes to legal questions. And I'm a student of Gianni Vattimo, and sort of with the perspectivism which we share. There's a strong awareness that there's a lot of violence which goes along and force which goes along with any kind of truth claims. So my hope would be that we've talked a lot about like sexism, speciesism, racism are all illegitimate types of discrimination. And I think we need to start to realize some type of aletheism, that a certain kind of loads of discrimination go along with any kind of strong truth claims. Wherever someone have a strong moral truth claim, it goes along with morally problematic types of discrimination and violence, which hopefully in the same way will get dissolved and eradicated as we've been quite successful on working on sexism, racism, speciesism. And so aletheism is I think the next challenge which we need to start to learn to twist and overcome and deal with. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Professor Sogna. I'll move on to Professor Cecchi. Dario.
Yes, thank you very much. As usual in this seminar, the debate is always very genuine and productive for my thoughts. So I would like to send my grateful thanks to Brunella, Stefan, and all the board of organizers, and of course Chrissy, who was very good in arranging everything. And I believe that, especially considering the last discussion about abortion, that which was very interesting, that perhaps in the next future we should reconsider a little bit topics of persuasion, maybe, and of suspicion are two concepts which might be interesting to analyze in order to have an idea of how these debates are, the direction they are taking today, I guess. Umberto Eco spoke a lot about suspicion as a general feature of the public discourse today, for instance.
Thank you very, very much. And we'll move on to our last concluding remarks from Professor De Luca.
Thank you, Chrissy. I think that the aim of this workshop was far from being that of addressing specific problems, like, for example, the moral problem of abortion, was going to a sort of meta level and ask whether it is possible to address problems and discuss problems involving the concept of truth. And especially, or in particular, in light of the discussion about universalism and relativism that took place in the last decades, or in the decades of last century. And I think that the answer is in the positive. We have the possibility of extend truth talk to every problem we have, every topic we can discuss, any rational topic at least. So aesthetics, ethics, physics, and so on, social sciences, and so on and so forth. And provided that we understand what is the best way or the most plausible way to interpret truth and the concept of truth, I mean. And I think that the position I briefly illustrated, that of alethic pluralism, can aid us in this case, just because it draws our attention to the fact that we use the adjective true in many ways, and ways that are different from each other. Because if we say that the Earth is round, for example, and we say that this is true, we mean by true a certain thing. Say we can resort to the old correspondence theory of truth. But when we say that a given claim, a given moral claim or aesthetical claim is true or false, the Gioconda of Leonardo is a beautiful picture. For example, it's true or false. Or again, a silly example like the one about abortion, but forgive me for this. Then we are using the word true in another way. And of course, the idea of correspondence here is forbidden, would be nonsense. So in the end, in brief, the message that my brief presentation wanted to convey is just this, that we can talk about truth, just pay attention to what we do on a daily life when we use the word true, which is, so to speak, the representative of the concept of truth on the level of language.
Many thanks. It's been so wonderful having all of you here and participating in this exchange. So here it is already 9:30 in Rome. I think we're all getting hungry, need something to eat and maybe a drink too. So
go to the restaurant.
Thank all of you for your participation. I'm already looking forward to meeting up with you personally sometime to then also have a drink here and a pizza in Trastevere, which is very beautiful.
Yes.
Maybe Brunella, you also want to say for the final word?
Confirm what Stefan said. For once, I didn't disagree with Stefan for once.
Thank you to the three organizers. Thank you very much.
Thanks you so much, Stefan.
Goodbye. Good night, everyone.
Goodbye. Have a nice evening.